The ocean is not empty. It is a cathedral of silence, pressing down with a weight older than any nation, any war. Out there, beneath miles of black water, machines lie forgotten, rusting vaults of history, sealed by pressure and time. Some are catalogued, filed away, mapped on neat charts, but others vanish into the abyss, leaving nothing but rumors and the echoes of metal that shouldn't still speak. Welcome back to Somnolent Conspiracies. Here, we follow the trails most reports bury and surface the secrets left to rot in the dark. Tonight, I want you to imagine yourself aboard a midnight watch, the sea flat and endless around you. All systems steady, all readings calm, and then knock, a hollow rap against steel. You tell yourself it's nothing. The sea plays tricks, but then it happens again, louder, rhythmic, as if something inside the hull is asking to be let out. What would you do if, in the loneliest hours of the night, something knocked from within a sealed chamber of steel? Because that is the story we're following tonight. An abandoned nuclear submarine, resting deep in the Norwegian Sea. Officially, it does not exist. Officially, it was never built, never sunk, never sealed in its trench. And yet, divers whisper of it. A black leviathan where sound itself disappears. Sailors say that if you drift above its shadow at midnight, you can hear it. Skull-like echoes tapping on the pressure doors. Not the sea, not machinery, something else. Let's follow the dive crew who went down to see if dead steel can still breathe. Part 1, Discovery of the Submarine. The first sign was not a shadow but a silence. On the NATO research vessel Scotty, the towed array poured a live ribbon of the Norwegian Sea whale song, ship screws, the granular hiss of distant weather. Then a trough of absence opened on the spectrogram, a black canyon shearing through the noise like a wound. Sonar techs leaned forward. Nature makes sound. Mistakes make more. Only engineered quiet looks this deliberate. Hold track, said Lieutenant Dahl. The operator froze the waterfall. The gap ran straight for 8 seconds, then 11, then 15, as if something enormous were swallowing every frequency aimed at it. Small returns died at the edge of the black zone, as if their echoes had been taken away. Dahl called the bridge. Dr. Etta Halvorsen, mission lead, ex-Navy acoustician, arrived with a headset crooked against her gray-streaked hair. She did not say impossible. She said, pattern match against known Soviet hull profiles. Include decommissioned classes. The Scotty turned in a slow arc, trailing microphones like a wake of glass. The trench answered with more of that engineered dark. A contour emerged. Tapering bow, the hint of a sail, proportions the brain couldn't help assembling into shape. Even in negative, it looked like a submarine, specifically a lineage with scars older than its paint. Bring up K-series derivatives, Halvorsen said softly. Especially anything off the K-278 line. The computer spat out comparisons, an alphabet of ghosts. The K-278 Komsomolets had gone down in 1989. Its story was a liturgy aboard any Northern Navy. But this silhouette was not the Komsomolets. It was a cousin that should never have been at sea, much less buried here. A prototype derivative with subtle changes to the sail and bow planes, and a hull length that refused to match any schematic. Renault, the historian on contract from Paris, shuffled Soviet shipyard memos. Nothing, he said. Rumors of a unit built under a false designation and scrapped on the slipway, but nothing with a keel laid, much less a voyage. No record of any K-278 derivative being scuttled in this quadrant. And yet, Halvorsen murmured, something down there eats sound. They plotted a second pass. The void held shape. When the helmsman joked that perhaps they were mapping a hole in the ocean, no one laughed. Deploy the ROV, Halvorsen decided. The remotely operated vehicle descended in a halo of lights, the cable paying out in patient loops. The feed showed snowfall, marine snow, then the vague gradient of the seafloor. At the trench lip, the light thinned, as if the water were denser. The motors whined, compensating. And then it appeared, not as a reflective object, but as a subtraction. A long, cylindrical night inside night. The ROV's cameras skated across lines that didn't reflect, Sonar pings sank without reply. The hull looked blacker than the sea around it, a physics that offended the eye. Around the sail, the camera caught flensed paint and Cyrillic stenciling ghosted to bone. On the bow, a painted number had been sanded to anonymity. Someone had meant to erase this thing from every ledger. The ROV edged toward the starboard side. As it closed, telemetry hiccuped. Spits of static peppered the comms. Ortiz, the engineer, tapped the screen. The altimeter needle jittered, steadied, then twitched twice as if nudged from below. The ROV's shell rang, barely audible through the water. A quick metallic tremor you could mistake for equipment chatter if your mind wanted mercy. Ping again, Dahl said. The return died upon striking the hull. Not scattered, not absorbed, gone. Graphs flattened like heart monitors uttering a last line. Halvorsen ordered a contour sweep and a radiation sniff. The plot sharpened into geometry while the meters stayed ordinary. The water felt older, the trench newly made. A contradiction the instruments registered but refused to explain. Text pressed closer, unconsciously mirroring the ROV's approach. The sub lay canted, settled in silt like a leviathan at rest. No breach, no visible torpedo damage, no collapsed bulkheads. The sail was intact. It looked less wrecked than placed. Mira, the youngest diver on the roster, stuck her hands in her pockets, pretending not to shiver. "It's cold," she said, not meaning temperature. "It doesn't throw anything back, like it doesn't want to be heard." "Steele remembers," Ortiz said. "This one's practicing selective amnesia." Renault wrote, quick and tight. "A ghost submarine where no charts recorded one. If it is a K-278 derivative, it should have been trialed near Murmansk, not abandoned here." "Someone noticed," Halvorsen said. "They made sure it wouldn't be spoken of." On the next sweep, a flicker crossed the ROV screen. A blink you could blame on particulate. The audio logged a tick at the same instant. A single, sharp event buried in miles of hush. "Artifact," Ortiz said. "Maybe," Halvorsen answered. By dusk, the Scotty's crew spoke in murmurs, as if the quiet below required a matching quiet above. A phrase threaded the conversation anyway, light at first, gaining weight with repetition. "Ghost sub," said the radio operator. "Ghost sub," the deckhand echoed. From the waterline to the galley to the red-lit lab, the rumor made its way, and with it a pressure neither barometer nor psychrometer could register. Salvage orders were drafted before midnight, and the first dive was scheduled with the morning tide. Part 2, the salvage team. Morning came gray and windless. On the Scotty's aft deck, the crew laid out rebreathers, bailout bottles, umbilicals, thrusters, torches, and a decopod. Dr. Etta Halvorsen moved through it with a clipboard and a memory that didn't miss. "2 teams," she said. "Clean signals, cleaner lines. We're not lifting steel today. We're lifting facts." Ortiz, the chief engineer, listened to the winch with his hands. Money brought him enough to fix a roof in Cadiz and keep a creditor patient. But the real draw was the impossible. Mira adjusted her harness, slow, deliberate. 25, quick as rumor. She saved words for when pipes burst. Glory wasn't the word. She loved stepping through a hatch into another century. Curiosity pulled like gravity. It felt like reading a diary the sea refused to burn. Each page heavy with salt and unspoken decisions and warnings. Renault arrived with a Pelican case and a bag that couldn't forgive him. Historian by training, document scavenger by instinct, he had slept 3 hours and dreamed of shipyard stamps. If the sub was unrecorded, his career might finally stop knocking on closed doors. "Good morning," he said, bright with damp nerves. "I've compared sail outlines. There's a late phase deviation in the bow planes. Prototype after K-278, before standardization." Ortiz didn't look up. "Will your deviation keep us from getting crushed, Professor?" "It might keep you from opening the wrong door," Renault said. Lieutenant Dahl gathered them by the chart table, a bathymetric printout under plastic. "Bell dropped to starboard shoulder," he said. "Traverse to the sail. No entry first pass. We look, tag, map. Abort is strategy, not surrender." Halvorsen added, Rope management is religion. Treat comms like lungs. If anything feels wrong, say it. We end that cycle. They went around motivations because Halvorsen insisted. Secrets turn into ballast at depth. Money, Ortiz said. Enough that I stop choosing which things my kid does without. Recognition, Renault said. A paper no one can ignore. Curiosity, Mira said. Then, after a beat, proof that I think clearly when the walls change shape. Closure, Halvorsen said softly. For a noise I heard once and couldn't name, the winch test sang. A light swell shouldered the hull. Gulls stitched the sky. Banter rose and fell because the trench below had already set the day's volume. Mira stood at the rail and let neoprene, metal, and a ghost of diesel settle into something steerable. She pictured, again, a corridor that was also a throat. Last chance to take up accounting, Ortiz said, checking her rig. Numbers scare me more than pressure, she said. Renault drifted over. The Russian for pressure Davolny shares a route width to press by hand. Their manuals read as if something is pushing on you. That's because something is, Ortiz said. It's called the ocean. Halvorsen drew them in. Say the thought that will tempt you. Cutting corners, Ortiz said. I hate wasted motion. Staying to see one more room, Mira said. Interpreting evidence to fit a thesis, Renault said. Pretending I'm still Navy, Halvorsen said. All right, we hold one another's leashes. Mira hesitated, then offered a tether. My grandfather welded in a shipbreaking yard. He said steel remembers what dies inside it. If you listen in the right dark, you can hear the mistakes. Ortiz snorted. Steel remembers the idiot who skipped an O-ring. Dahl passing, smiled without heat. Helms over the trench lip. 5 minutes. The bell came aft on its rail. Yellowed paint and round windows like a relic. Crew in orange coveralls worked taglines with the economy of people who knew the distance between almost an accident. Halvorsen, Mira, and Ortiz would ride the first descent. Renault would follow on the second drop with line handlers. Checklist, Halvorsen said, and it became a litany. Helmets locked. Umbilicals clear. Bailout charged. Thrusters test. Comms green. Green, Ortiz said. Green, Mira echoed. Renault clipped a camera inside. For the archive. Make sure the archive includes us swearing, Ortiz said. They climbed into the capsule. The hatch sealed with that shipboard finality that tells you the next noises will be yours. Light narrowed to circles. The gray world flattened to an ellipsis. The winch took the weight and the surface slid away. Surface Bell 1, Dahl said over comms. You're green. See you in 30. Bell 1 copy, Halvorsen said. Descending. Straps slackened. Bones negotiated with buoyancy. The frame hummed against the line. Light shifted from pewter to green to a dark that behaves. Depth rolled on gauges like a patient clock. Mira watched the needle as if it could be reasoned with. Comms steady, Ortiz reported. Pulse clean. Copy, Dahl said. Above, engines changed pitch. They felt it more than heard it. They crossed the thermocline and the cold arrived like a new fact. Conversation thinned. They listened to breath and the unsettled clicks no one named. The past felt like a hand. Approaching starboard shoulder, Halvorsen said. Lights to half. A shape gathered in the window. It did not gleam. It removed. The hull took their beams and made them smaller. Paint hung in parched sheets. Rivets appeared like a constellation the night resented. Even the silt leaned. No one spoke for 3 breaths. Mira leaned forward, helmet glass almost touching the view. Steel remembers, she said. Ortiz didn't laugh. Let's hope it remembers manners. Outside, the water felt thicker, as if the sub's presence had changed the recipe. Instruments stayed green, but the mind's risk calculus added numbers without being asked. Hold, Halvorsen said. The bell steadied. Prepare to disembark. They checked lines again, a ritual against imagination. Hands on latches, boots ready to find a surface that did not want them. They waited for Halvorsen's count. Somewhere in the calm net a gull cried. a ridiculous object from another world. At Halvorson's nod, the outer hatch swung. Cold darkness breathed in, and 3 cones of light cut the water. They descended, blades of white sliding down the black skin of the submarine. Part 3, First Contact with the Hull. The sea took them in and dimmed the world to 3 cones of light. The submarine filled the water like a blackout curtain. No gleam, no scatter, just the subtraction of brightness wherever their beams touched. Surface, Bell 1 is steady, Dahl said in their ears. You are go for starboard survey. Copy, Halvorsen replied. Online. Keep spacing. Umbilicals drew soft lines behind them. Thrusters low. They moved along the plating at arm's length. The metal drank heat through Myra's glove. The cold felt like policy. Paint hung in lifting strips. Cyrillic had weathered to the memory of letters. Halvorsen extended a probe and touched the steel. The comms laced with a dry crackle that wasn't transmission noise so much as texture. Interference at contact, she said. Mark frame 63. Ortiz pressed his depth gauge lightly against the hull as if comparing pulses. The needle shivered, then rattled in a short rap, a utensil on a cup from somewhere inside the metal. He flinched and pretended he hadn't. Mechanical resonance. Our fans. Our fans are aft, Mira said. Then your heart, Ortiz said. Heart beats mine, not the boat's, she answered. The water thickened as they advanced, the beams going dull at their edges. Barnacles along welds were stunted, a pale zipper that stopped where a seam deviated. Biological suppression along join lines, Halvorsen observed. Suppression by what? Ortiz asked. By whatever happened here, she said. The sail rose above them, blotting even imagined moonlight. Fittings stood like punctuation. Where unit numbers should have anchored identity, there were rectangles of overpaint sanded to sameness. Mira set her palm against the hull. Under glove and bone she felt the faintest percussion. 3 light pulses, pause, then 2 too even for current noise, too soft to enter the headset. She lifted her hand. The sensation ceased. She set it back. It returned. Report, Halvorsen asked. Pressure microvariations, Mira said, hedging. Mark it. They drifted on. The calm hiss deepened when they crossed invisible lines, as if beams of interference stitched the hull. Ortiz brushed the plating again and his gauge rattled. This time even Halvorsen sensed a pressure event rather than sound. Surface, any impulse copy? She asked. Negative, Dahl said. You're clean. Mira dropped toward the seafloor and found a rectangle set into the plating. An auxiliary panel painted over, its bolts buried. AUX access, she said. Starboard, 2 meters forward of our marker. Confirm, Halvorsen said, descending to see it. They meant this to vanish. They meant the whole ship to, Ortiz said. The run widened into uninterrupted plating pocked with shallow round dents, clean-edged and repetitive, not corrosion but impacts. Each was the size of a knuckle. Not spall, Ortiz said. Looks like taps. Taps? Mira echoed, and her palm tingled where she'd felt the rhythm. Near an old fairing line, conduits dived into the hull. Tiny threads of plankton glowed and went dark in their wash. The interference sharpened as they crossed a seam. Patterned field, Halvorsen said. Logging. Logged, Dahl answered. Feels intentional. They reached a plate where a vent should have been. Someone had sealed it with hurried welds. Down the center, that same shallow bruise repeated at a human rhythm. You are not going to say like someone knocking, Halvorsen said before Ortiz could. I was going to say like a test, he lied. Mira touched the bruise. The rhythm came up through her glove again, 3 pause, 2 strictly subsensory, as if the body kept its own ear. Do you? She began. No, Ortiz said quickly. I don't. They resumed the grid, discipline first, entry later. The sail fell behind. The bow curve gathered ahead with a complicated grace. Here, the plating swallowed their light more thoroughly, mat upon mat, as if this section had been built to erase rather than resist. Surface time? Halvorsen asked. 18 minutes. Copy. Myra's beam caught on a recess ahead. A proper access hatch resolved from silt and paint, its wheel intact, designation scrubbed away. It looked like a mouth that had learned patience. Primary hatch, she said. Integrity looks good. We are not going in, Ortiz repeated. Correct, Halvorsen said. We mark, rig, and brief for breach on second pass. Still, none of them could help hovering there a heartbeat too long. Proceed, Halvorsen said. Their lights skimmed a panel further aft. Mira brushed silt at its base and uncovered Cyrillic reduced to scar, Bostuk, half erased. Another probe tap, another smothered half-sound. Their own breathing rose and fell like a tide forbidden to the water outside. Surface, we're logging interference nodes every 5 meters, Halvorsen said. Trace runs along altered welds. Copy. Minor EM drift at your location, Dahl said. Any external returns? Ortiz asked. Negative, Dahl said. You three are the only trouble we have. The trench dropped off beside them. Mira kept to the hull. She put her hand to the steel again, palm flat, and the rhythm found her as if she had dialed a number. 3, pause, 2. Say it, Ortiz muttered. Get it out. It feels like a knock, she admitted, like someone establishing a pattern. We respond with procedure, Halvorsen said. They came back to the primary hatch. Silt whispered along its lower arc. The wheel wore a film of age but no growth. Halvorsen circled the light. Reading seals the way a surgeon reads skin. Ortiz, pull the toolkit. Mira, set markers. Keep the line clean. Copy, Ortiz said, unclipping the small hydraulic spreader and a bag of wrenches. He laid them out on a tether as neatly as a prayer. Mira fixed strobes in a triangle, ran a hand down the guideline, and felt steadier for the geometry. Her palm ghosted the wheel without touching. The headset hiss climbed for a moment, a soft swell without source. Surface to team, Dahl said, thin. Brief EM spike at your location. Noted, Halvorsen said. We're prepping for breach on next descent. No entry this pass. Mira looked back along the hull. The dents, those neat, shallow circles, seemed to multiply in the beam, or perhaps she had only now taught her eyes to see them. She put her glove to the metal one last time. Nothing. Then, faintly, an isolated pulse, the smallest yes her skin had ever felt. Time. 24 minutes, Dahl said. We're heading to the bell, Halvorsen said. They left the hatch marked, lines clipped and spreader rigged, and kicked off the hull toward the bell, already speaking in the short phrases of people who knew the next thing they would do was open a door. Part 4, entering the submarine. They went back as a 4. Halvorsen, Mira, and Ortiz rode the bell. Renault followed on a tender umbilical, his pelican case buckled tight. The marked hatch glowed in their strobes like a white triangle stitched to the black. Surface, Bell 1 and Line 2 diver on site, Dahl said. Telemetry stable. Copy, Halvorsen answered. Begin breach protocol. Ortiz seated the spreader beside the wheel. The jaws settled, kissed, and pushed. The wheel resisted, then yielded a grudging quarter turn. Silt lifted in a gray veil. Mira swept their perimeter. The shallow circular dents, the ones like knuckles, stopped at the hatch frame, as if even whatever made them observed boundaries. She steadied her breath, counting the numbers that make fear follow orders. Renault kept his lamp on his slate. Record point. Starboard primary hatch. Non-standard gasket. Flange tooth pattern not in reference sets. Save the taxonomy for the ride up, Ortiz muttered, and rolled the wheel again. The hatch dogs popped in a tired sequence. Water-filled seals unkissed. Halvorsen laid a gloved palm to the plate. Stand by for air exchange. She spun the last degree. The gasket side. The hatch opened with a long, reluctant creak. What came out wasn't air so much as the history of air stale brine, machine breath, paint, sleep. Their filters caught most of it. The rest got through on memory. Pressure equalized. Loose silt feathered past in the wake of their waiting. Surface, we have breach, Halvorsen said. Proceeding. The inner door relented quicker. Darkness grew a mouth. 3 beams poured in and found a corridor narrow enough to make the mind square its shoulders. Frosted dials looked unblinking in glass that had dreamed of cracking. Peeling Soviet lettering hung from placards, Avarini flaking to fragments, Bitania to done. Someone had sanded off designations and lost interest halfway through. Lines high, Halvorsen said. No snagging. We don't die in clutter. They went single file. Rubber tiles along the deck held Salt's handwriting. Lockers stood ajar. A glove, a dull star of a cap badge, a shoe curved to a ghost's toes. Bunks stacked too high, mattresses oxidized to lace, springs like ribs. A painted line on the deck once told sailors where not to stand. It now led nowhere. Renault held his beam on the walls. This connector turns into a service duct with acoustic baffles. He lifted his camera to perforated recesses. Experimental damping, not in any plan. Meant to swallow sound, Ortiz said. Or retrain it, Renault murmured. An emergency phone hung in its cradle. Mira lifted the receiver. Only the sea answered. The kind of silence that isn't empty. Don't listen too long, Halvorsen said, surprising herself with the superstition. Placards had been sanded to suggestion. A compartment diagram was abraded to a topology of second thoughts. Beneath lacquer someone had penciled Nyestuchith. Do not knock. Renault stared. That warning doesn't belong here. Maybe it should have, Ortiz said. A watertight door stood stiff with salt, port light blind. Across, a painted arrow to Nos bow had been scrubbed to a smear. The place had the earned absence of a decommissioned machine and the wrong vibrancy of a staged one. Vitals? Halvorsen asked. They answered green. Checklists thinned fear. The corridor answered back. A noise ran it like a gloved knuckle on a sheet of metal, high, dry, clean. Knock. It traveled the bulkheads as if the ship had a hollow throat. They froze in agreement. Strobes seemed to slow. Breathing got louder in their heads. Surface, did you? Halvorsen began. Negative, Dahl said, voice a rung lower. Only you're calm. The sound did not repeat. Its absence had edges. Direction, Ortiz asked. Mira tilted her helmet, using her own bones as microphone. Forward, starboard side, behind heavier plating. Feels like bay doors. Torpedo bay, Renault said. But the access on this class should be farther up. And look, tables rebolted off-center to clear extra plating. These baffles mean any impact here would read as something else on recorders. He looked up, pale in the helmet. This design isn't in the records. Not a variant, not a rumor. Nothing. They moved in small pulls. The corridor narrowed, the blueprint bending toward secrecy. Their beams found a crew mess turned sideways. Stamps on a hatch frame that read more like a lab cipher than yard ID. Mira kept a hand on the line the way you hold a thought steady. Another knock. Same register, closer. Mira felt it in her wrist before her ear admitted it. Not a system, Halvorsen said. Systems don't come back from the dead to knock. They reached a sealed door different from the rest. The wheel was missing. A weld stripe crossed the seat like a scar. The label plate had been ground to bare metal and then scratched with insistence anyway, Zech 03 overscored by frantic XXX. Along the seam, those shallow round bruises multiplied, hammer dull, repeating like scales. Mira laid her palm to the door. Cold climbed her bones. She tapped once, firm enough to feel feedback. The answer came so quick it braided with her own beat. Knock. Close. As if her touch had closed a circuit. Ortiz flinched despite pride. Nothing answers that fast through bulkhead and depth unless it's inches away. Or unless the room answers itself, Renault said. They listened. The corridor listened back. Silt drifted as though disturbed by a wake without a source. The knock ceased, louder in recollection than sound. Surface, Halvorsen said evenly. Be advised. Internal geometry inconsistent with class. Discrete knocks heard twice. No mechanical signatures. Copy, Dahl said. Superstition leaving off the usual good luck word. Numbers argued for restraint. On land, curiosity can be debated with language. Underwater, you argue with air and time. Here's the move, Halvorsen said. We pull to the hatch, clear the line, and plan the breach by the book. We bring the decopod close. No improvisation. The boat wants us to hurry. We won't. A third knock, sharper, farther down the seam, then stillness. It's the bay, Mira said. Whatever is doing that is behind the torpedo bay door. No one disagreed. Agreement felt like pressure equalizing. Too fast, too complete. They started back, minds already laying out wrenches and contingencies, arguments for and against urgency. The corridor seemed to lengthen in the way uncooperative structures do. Halvorsen counted turns aloud. Ortiz kept a hand on the main line as if it were a rosary. Renault walked backward for 20 paces, filming the closed door until it became a bright coin and then a thought. At the threshold, the stale air tasted a shade less indifferent, as if they had spoken a word the ship knew. Composure clicked into the places it had slipped. They marked readings and searched one another's faces for hairline cracks you can't hear over comms. Curiosity wins. They clipped the spreader to the strap, set the strobes to steady, and agreed, without voting, that the next pass would take them to the sealed torpedo bay. Part 5, the torpedo bay. They came back with tools built to decide. The spreader clipped to a tether. Renault carried 2 pressure-housed cameras. Mira brought the steadiness of someone who had slept badly. Ortiz checked seals twice, then nodded once. Surface, team at bay seam, Halvorsen said. Beginning forced entry on sealed door marked Zech 03. Copy, Dahl answered. Weak EM drift. Green. The weld bead was hurried, uneven. Ortiz brushed a strip clean. Burrs showed dull. We ease, he said. No popping today. The ram's foot met the seam. He cracked the valve, no clang, only pressure. Trapped water side. Hold, Halvorsen said. Nothing rushed. Again. The door shifted. The hinge refused. Ortiz swapped to the spreader, found bite, squeezed. Stop, Mira said. A tiny, dry contact had traveled through tool and bone. Came again. 3 quick, crisp knocks from within the door. Recording, Renault said, voice small. Surface, Halvorsen said evenly. Mark time. 3 impacts. No pressure transient. Halvorsen pressed her glove flat, a doctor's palm to a frightened chest. She tapped once with a wrench. Hello in steel. The answer braided with her tap as she finished. 3 again, exact in spacing, habit. Pressure equalization, Ortiz said, but his voice changed. Again, Halvorsen said. She tapped twice. Pause, then 2 replies nearer. We open on our terms. The door gave. Their beams poured into space beyond. 2 ranks of tubes waited port and starboard, mouths capped, throats dark. Rails and cranes hung overhead. A twisted catwalk froze mid-torque. Numbers were sanded to near nothing. Renault found a protected scrap of Cyrillic Uchebny training. Dummies in the tubes, he said. Ortiz peered in.
A placard read imitaционный.
He exhaled once. A classroom. They entered in a cautious V, lines high. Their beams found a neat array of shallow, round marks along the starboard bulkhead between tubes. The same no-corrosion bruises from outside, here multiplied, stacked like scales. Each the size of a knuckle. Myra's steps returned not as echo but as weighted thought. She raised her hand to the marks. Mira, Halvorsen warned. Myra's glove was already on the plate, gentle. 3 crisp, polite taps rose under her palm. There, she said. There. Surface, Halvorsen asked. Negative, Dahl said. Your channel is clean. Renault lifted his camera close to the wall. These blows are aligned, he said. An operator stood here and... Knocked for practice? Ortiz said. Knocked for code, Renault said. If a skull diagram existed, the frontal bone lands here. He leaned his brow toward the steel, then drew back, startled by the impulse. Mira took her hand away. The taps stopped. She set it back. They resumed, a lesson's cadence. They moved past the tubes. A removed inner door leaned like a shield. On its inside surface, A round patch the size of a human brow was sanded to bare plate. Chalk on the bulkhead read Stuchith, don't knock. This bay isn't in the derivative documentation, Renault said. Baffles, rails. The space was modded to be a listening room. For what? Ortiz asked. And 3 knocks answered, crisp and small, traveling the bulkhead. Dry, as if the room had grown a knuckle. Mark time, Halvorsen said. Dahl complied. Myra's light crossed something pale and silt inside a port tube. A dome, bone-colored, familiar. Renault. He came. The object was the upper half of a human skull, cleanly parted from the face. Document, Halvorsen said. Renault filmed. Ortiz hovered, joke failed. Training, Renault whispered. Not metaphor. They followed the pale trail to an aft locker. Inside, canvas slings nested a careful inventory. Dozens of human skulls lay in the slings like ordnance. Mira brushed a sling. 2 rolled into her beam, knocking softly. Each skull wore starved fractures on the forehead, each with a rubbed patch where bone had met steel over and over. 1 skull settled against the torpedo hatch seam, fitting there as if taut. For a breath, nothing. Then 3 crisp knocks came from the other side. Ortiz dropped his light. Pressure, he said, and had nothing else. Their lights glitched, then recovered. The water shivered in a low way. Rails seemed to hum without moving. A not-quite noise found them. Surface EM spike, Dahl said. Short, gone. All other channels steady. Copy, Halvorsen said. We are not alone. She didn't try to reel the sentence back. Mira crouched by the skull at the seam. The want to touch drew her hand like filings. Don't, Ortiz said, and she didn't. The worn brow faced the crack like a key aimed at a lock. Renault widened his shot. The camera sputtered, then cleared. Halvorsen raised a palm. We're leaving, she said. We have what we came for. We plan with oxygen and distance. No one argued. They backed out the way divers do when they want the room to believe leaving was the room's idea. The seam closed with small, exhausted noises and a final click. Surface exiting the bay, Halvorsen said. Mark elapsed. Marked, Dahl said. Far away, close enough to imagine, the ship's clock gave a single electronic pip, a prelude to the hour. They logged the knocks, copied timestamps, and left the bay unspoiled, bagging nothing they did not understand. On the ladder to the bell, no one spoke. Even the line creaked, as if the boat listened for what they decided next. Time, Halvorsen asked. 23:47, Dahl said. Call it 48 by the bell. For midnight, she said. At midnight by shipboard time, as if feeling for a schedule, the knocks began again. Everywhere at once, precise and insistent, a heartbeat against steel that did not belong to the living. Part 6, Unearthing the Skulls. Midnight did not arrive as a number. It arrived as rhythm. 3 crisp knocks. Pause, 2, pause, 3. Running the length of the submarine at once, braided through bulkheads and frames as if the whole hull had learned a single habit. The sound did not swell through water. It appeared already inside the metal, too clean for distance, too intimate for echo. Surface, confirmed 1200, Halvorsen said, not trusting the submarine to tell time. Confirmed, Dahl answered. We're seeing a brief EM flutter on your grid. Just blipped again. Comms still good. In the torpedo bay, their beams trembled without moving. Rails seemed to hum with a note nobody had asked for. The worn brow at the hatch seam, the skull they had not dared to touch, sat like a key in a lock and did not roll. Mira felt the knocks in her wrists before she admitted hearing them. Count, she said, and found her voice too loud in her own helmet. 323, Renault whispered, as if the room could confiscate a number. Mark, Halvorsen said. Ortiz clicked the counter clipped to his harness, an old diver's habit for new data. He kept clicking as if clicks could carry them through. The knocks drifted starboard, then aft like footsteps along plate and frame. They were small, polite, undeniable. They passed the slings of skulls, and each skull seemed to agree, faintly, with its own little response. Bone whispering to steel, the ghost of impact learned by repetition. Mira stepped toward the aft lockers. The one they had opened, careful, deliberate, held its inventory of pale domes like ordnance in a chapel. Beside it, a corroded twin showed hinges like scabs and a face no one had yet disturbed. A film of salt bridged seemed to frame as if the ocean had stitched it shut. "Leave it," Ortiz said, already knowing they would not. "Document first," Halvorsen said. "Then we test." Renault filmed the surface of the door, panning slowly. On the rust sprawl, someone had scratched a human figure as a stickman with a round, overlarge head and a line from forehead to a square, the bulkhead. Beside it, Istuchith in hasty, gouged letters, as if carved in the minute before an order arrived. Mira slid the tip of her dive knife into the seam. The salt lace cracked. She worked from top hinge to bottom, worry a metronome she refused to hear. The knocks elsewhere kept their tempo, unconcerned. "Hold up," Ortiz said, bringing a spud wrench to bear as a lever. "We ease. If it's sprung, we don't take it in the face." They set a strap, clipped it to a rail, found a way to persuade without tearing. The door groaned with the pain of old iron remembering a shape. Silt drifted like dust in a beam of Saturday sunlight. The line to the bell tugged once, ship motion or just nerves reading signs. "On 3, Halvorsen said. 1, 2. The third count was drowned by a new series of knocks. Fast, stuttering, impatient. Racing down the seam behind the door. The vibration traveled tool to wrist to shoulder. It wasn't loud. It was convincing. 3, Halvorsen finished. The hinge surrendered. The locker door swung in a short, startled arc and stopped against a sling rail. Something pale moved inside. Then many pale somethings, as if light itself had become granular and decided to roll. Dozens of human skulls spilled out. They came in slow-motion avalanches, bumping in the shallow water, toned down by depth, amplified by proximity. Each wore a rubbed patch on the frontal bone, a dull, polished oval where brow had met steel until steel took a memory. Microfractures spidered from those ovals. Starved, repetitive breaks healed only by time and salt. Teeth grinned because teeth always do when skin is gone. Some skulls carried faint handwriting in pencil or wax pencil. Numbers crossed out, initials smudged, a date that dissolved into nothing at the last digit. Renault made a small sound he didn't recognize as his. His camera stayed steady. "It's an inventory," he said, narrating for the part of his mind that would later try to say this had not happened. "Systematic, not battle-dead. These were handled." One skull struck the deck and rolled with inexplicable precision to the torpedo hatch seam, stopping in the worn hollow as if returning to a socket. Another gyred, circling in a patient three-quarter loop, then settled against the first, cheek to cheek. A knock answered immediately from the other side of the seam, 3 crisp taps, the exact register of a wedding ring on a kitchen table, startlingly domestic inside the kingdom of pressure. "Surface," Halvorsen said. "Negative on acoustic," Dahl answered. "But we just got a 2-second camera artifact on your feed. Repeat, brief video snow." As if on cue, Renault's display fizzled with diagonal static, a VHS wound in a digital skin. The interference crawled like frost and then cleared, leaving the image too still. Myra's lamp dimmed and came back at half strength. Her wrist gauge bleeped once and refused to confess why. Ortiz's depth gauge needle jiggled as if irritated by a finger. In the water around them, silt rose in a sheet and then hung, as if the vibration of the knocks had redistributed gravity a little. "Ing spike daw saij." Short, radiation still nominal. Repeat nominal. "Nominal," Ortiz muttered. "Tell that to the part of my brain that just put on a coat." Mira crouched with the impulse of touch and the counter-impulse of training fighting to a draw. She did not touch the skulls. She watched the seam. The polished brow of the nearest skull seemed to pulse with their lamps. Just rhythm, just flicker, and then she realized the pulsing matched the knocks elsewhere. 3-2-3. "Renault," she said. "Zoom on the fractures." He complied, close enough that the bone pores read like a map. Multiple low-energy impacts to the frontal, consistent angle, consistent force. Not panic. Practice. He swallowed. Or instruction. Instruction for what? Ortiz said. He knew. He wanted her to say it. For making sound through steel, Renault said. For making meaning. Mira leaned her helmet toward the seam, faceplate inches from the metal. She didn't hear with her ears. She felt a tiny hello in her teeth, a fragment of vibration crossing enamel and nerve. Don't answer, Halvorsen said. And Mira realized her hand had found her wrench again. A fresh knock traveled the bulkhead behind them, small, wild, like a child rapping the underside of a table. Another replied at the far end of the bay, measured and adult. The room became a conversation no one in it had initiated. Some knocks were rain. Some were grammar. Surface. Do you see this on ROV2? Halvorsen asked. They had left the little vehicle in the corridor, nose toward the hatch. Any motion at our door? ROV2 shows silt drift only, Dahl said. But your local lighting just dipped 20% and recovered. That's not our side. Copy, Halvorsen said. This is not a drill. We're treating it as a dynamic hazard. She did what she had sworn not to. She laid the flat of her wrench against the seam and tapped once, lightly, as a mechanic tests a bearing. It was less language than a diagnostic. The answer came inside the same breath. 3 polite knocks, exactly matched in spacing, the way a mirror matches a face. Then, after a pause, 2 more, softer, like a correction. Renault exhaled a sound like a laugh, then made it a cough. They're teaching us, he said. Even now. We're leaving, Halvorsen said, and heard her voice as if from another room. We leave, we plan, we. The next series of knocks did not go through the seam. It ran along the deck under their boots, then up the opposite wall, a circuit of percussion mapping the room as if to show them where they were. Lights dimmed again. This time they did not fully recover. Water pressed in a way that had nothing to do with depth, a hand on a chest before CPR. EM spike, Dahl said, voice thin with the discipline of not asking if they were all right. Bigger, then nothing. Your vitals bouncing but readable. Ortiz swung his beam across the rails. For a second, only a second, the shadows at the ends of the tubes were fractionally darker than they should have been, as if something stood exactly still and delighted in stillness. Did you? He began. No, Mira said, fast. Document, Halvorsen said, equally fast, adding command like a lid. They retreated to the threshold, backing like people leaving a room that had begun to speak a language too quickly. As Mira passed the locker, her fin brushed a sling and a new spill of skulls rolled, bumping one another, faces turning toward the seam with a child's unblinking interest. One came to rest against her boot with a soft talk. The worn brow was warm through the rubber, a lie her nerves told to make the sensation comprehensible. She placed it gently back into the sling. It rocked once and went still. At the hatch, she looked over her shoulder. A thing she did not do underwater, and caught in her beam a detail she'd missed. A chalk line on the bulkhead waist-high, and below it tally marks in groups of 5, marching toward a number the chalk had not reached. Beside them, a circle with a dot in the center. A percussionist sign for play here. Renault, she said. He filmed and didn't speak. The knocks faded, not ended. Faded, like a neighbor finishing a phone call and returning to another room. The rails stopped humming. Silt settled. Lighting lifted a shade closer to normal, as if daylight at the surface had remembered its job. Vitals, Halvorsen said. They answered. Green enough. We're moving, she decided. Forward passage to control. If there's a story, it lives there. Copy, Dahl said. I'll vector the ROV to your next junction. Keep talking. They gathered their line, gave the bay its dignity, set the door as they had found it minus truth. Halvorsen paused by the skull at the seam. She did not touch it. She bowed an inch, a superstition she would deny. We heard you, she said, too soft for the comm to transmit. The corridor received them like a throat that had not yet swallowed. Their lamps resumed making rooms out of water. The knocks did not follow. Or perhaps they went elsewhere, ahead, to be waiting where the ship kept its mind. Steel remembers, Mira said, not as comfort. And wants to be remembered, Renault said. Or wants a witness, Ortiz said, and hated that he had given the thought breath. Halvorsen set a strobe at the junction and made a dot on the slate. Bay inventory, anomaly departed. Procedure felt like a ladder. She climbed it. Next stop is control, she said. We pass crew spaces if we must, but we don't go curio shopping. If there's a log, it's there. If there's a system, it's there. If there's a way to make this stop, it's there, Mira finished, surprised how sure she sounded. They moved out, the line between them drawn as straight as their nerve would allow, the ship's map reshaping into intent around their decisions. Behind them, in the bay, something very small knocked once. It sounded like acknowledgement. They pulled away toward the control room, shaken into a new kind of attention, carrying the shape of those worn brow ovals in their minds. And though every sensible thought said to abort, the pressure ahead felt less like danger than compulsion to push deeper. Part 7, the captain's quarters. The control corridor narrowed, the walls closing in with a shipwright's confidence that anything unnecessary had been shaved away. Their lights braided along perforated baffles and brackets that didn't match any blueprint Renault knew. The hull hummed with a memory of midnight, then stilled. Somewhere astern, the last of the torpedo bay knocks subsided, not ending so much as deciding to happen to someone else. Forward junction, Halvorsen said, her voice low by habit. Control to port. Officer berths to starboard. Mira kept one hand on the guideline and the other near the plate, as if the submarine might try to say her name. The water here was heavy with the smell of lacquer and old cloth, a museum sealed in brine and pressure. They cleared a dogged door whose paint had lifted in long curls. Beyond, the corridor opened half a meter wider and the fittings turned domestic. A folding chair trapped beneath a handrail. A tea tin webbed into a corner. A wall calendar bleached empty but for a headless cosmonaut. A placard with the raised letters Capitan, Captain, was screwed into a bulkhead next to a cabin hatch. The plate had been sanded and scratched, then lacquered over with the resignation of a cover-up performed well after the fact. The captain's quarters, Renault said, unnecessarily, saying it made the space behave. Surface marking officer cabin, Halvorsen said, proceeding with non-destructive entry. Ortiz eased the warped hatch with a pry bar. The seal let go in a series of sticky syllables and the door swung inward, sticky silt lifting from its lower edge like dust from a rug. Inside, the room was 1.5 bunks wide and not long enough for arguments. A desk bolted to the deck faced a tiny port blind with silt. Under the port, a metal locker with a naval padlock that had swollen and rusted into ceremony. A bookcase of welded angle iron hung at an angle, the shelves cradling old binders snugged in canvas straps. "Renault," Halvorsen said, "you're up." He drifted in and played his beam over the room as if reading it aloud. Above the desk, a corkboard displayed what the sea hadn't bothered to devour. A cutaway of the class with pencil additions, a hand-drawn timetable, a list with initials and dates, and a column titled Stuk. Knock, with tick marks and fives. In the corner, a crude sketch in grease pencil. A human skull drawn from memory with surprising accuracy, arrowed to the frontal bone. Beside it, in a different hand, in capitals, Lopshishu brow cleaner. "Cleaner what?" Ortiz asked. "Cleaner tone," Renault said softly. "Cleaner impulse." Mira floated closer to the desk. The drawers had been screwed shut, then backed out again, then screwed again with new holes. Someone had changed their mind twice and run out of spare metal. On the desktop, beneath a plexi protector, a rectangle of paper had survived. Not paper, oilcloth, the kind kept in captain's safes to resist water. The top sheet was water-stained but legible, the ink indigo lacquered by salt. "Logbook," Renault said, reverent. "Captain's hand." He undid the rusted clips with exaggerated care and slid the packet free. The pages hugged each other the way survivors do. He opened to the middle, then forward, then near the end, letting Brine decide where it would let him read. The handwriting marched at a naval slant, each date boxed, each entry beginning with weather and ending with orders, until it didn't. In the last third, the neat letters thickened. The line wandered. The dates dropped their formalities and became simply numbers. "Read," Halvorsen said. Renault angled his lamp and translated aloud, stumbling only when the syntax tired. Day 112. Acoustic trials continue. Emanation of damping baffles successful. External control stations report reduced returns. He flipped a page with his gloved fingertips, breath fogging his visor. Day 118. Volunteers from Penal Battalion transferred aboard under sealed orders. Medical assessed fit for manual tasks. Warden signs. A line scribbled through penal and replaced with auxiliary. Another line scribbled that out with a vicious score. Volunteers, Ortiz said, the word souring the regulator air. Renault went on. Day 127. The experiment begins. Capitalized. He swallowed. Objective. Generate intelligible signal through pressure hull using human percussion. Tested timbers. Hand, tool, bone. Bone most consonant. Bone returns clearest pattern through baffle array. Brow produces a clean fundamental. Parietal muddied by hair and curvature. Mandible useless. That sketch, Mira whispered, looking at the skull drawing above the desk. The arrow to the brow felt newly obscene. They tuned people. Renault turned another page. The handwriting had grown urgent, the lines packed closer. Day 130. Morse inadequate. New code adopted. See Appendix B. He flipped back. There was no appendix. Day 133. Volunteers will not stop knocking after drills. At rest, in mess, in racks. They knock in sleep. They knock on teeth. A blot of ink where the pen had paused and pressed. Myra's teeth ached in sympathy. She rubbed her jaw as if the feeling could be talked out of bone. Day 136. Renault read. We isolate them between drills. Knocking continues through bulkheads. It is contagious. Crew now knock unconsciously at railings. The ship's tone changes. Contagious, Halvorsen said. Like a rhythm infection. Rhythm is how the body organizes threat, Ortiz said. Then let the sentence die because it sounded like admission. Day 139, Renault said. List of those excused from duty for unnatural habits. I remove their names from the record. A column of letters, initials, then solid black scratches. He tries to erase them, Renault said, throat tightening. On paper, at least. Read the last days, Halvorsen said gently. Renault turned a page that wanted very badly to stick to its neighbor. Day 141. Signal received externally. Control confirms. Station copies. The next line had been started and scored out so deep the oilcloth had wrinkled. Beneath it, the captain's hand had resumed, smaller. Day 142. They hear us above. This is success. This is danger. A few entries later, the right margin torqued downslope as if the writer had been bracing the book against a moving knee. Day 144. Volunteers knock when not commanded. They knock messages we did not teach. They knock 3, 2, 3. They knock when the boat is still. They knock when the reactor sleeps. Mira felt the pattern land on her wrist as if the steel had been waiting for her to hear that particular order in that particular sentence. Day 145, Renault read, and the light seemed to dim a little in the room, even though it did not. The bow doors protest. We weld them. They knock through welds. Pause on the page. Day 146. I dream in impulses. I count my own teeth with my tongue. The margin bore a small row of dots, 11, then 9, then 11 again, too neat to be random, too spare to explain. He turned the page. Day 148. Warden demands more volunteers. I refuse. They do not stop knocking when I say stop. There is no stop. The next line was a sentence that could have been a prayer or a rage. Mr. Chief, written 3 times until the letters ate themselves. Day 149, Renault said, voice raw now. The experiment continues without me. Orders transmitted above my rank. I am captain of a boat I do not govern. Mira drifted toward the welded locker. Her lamp painted its scar. Flakes broke loose and swam like drowned confetti. Inside her headset, she could hear her own pulse counting. A private metronome that had been colonized by somebody else's song. Day 150, Renault said. I lock my door. They knock. I hold my hands over my ears. The knocking is in the desk, the bunk, the cup. The pen stroke faltered. Ink gouged a dark crater. Beneath, in letters that had abandoned their schooling, they knock with skulls. Cleaner, clearer. They prefer it. A marginal note in smaller script. Brow keep shaved. No one spoke. Out in the corridor, a faint tap traveled uncertainly and fell apart. The ship, for a second, sounded like a child learning to clap and failing. Skip ahead, Halvorsen said. Renault turned. The last page, he swallowed. Day 153. We sent pattern to the array. They answered. He didn't look at them. Coordinates. The numbers were there, then crossed out. Beneath, this cannot be at sea. Then, I tear this page. And then, the corner was ripped, the last third excised with an angry precision. The tier line had puckered from being torn underwater. Appendix missing. Last coordinates removed, Renault said. More for the record than because anyone needed it said. Halvorsen pointed to the bookcase. Anything else? Her voice sounded like a ladder being climbed. They searched with the steadiness of people who had decided that the next danger would be met while doing a sensible thing. Behind 2 manuals on reactor safety, wrapped in oilskin and twine, they found another packet, typed memo stamps off.
Секрет на топ секрет.
The carbons had bled into one another, paragraphs shadowing paragraphs. Renault leafed a few and paused at a table. Acoustic yield/human percussion trials. Columns. Operator, instrument, location, duration, signal integrity. Under instrument, fist, mallet, skull. The last column carried the best numbers. We can catalog later, Halvorsen said, feeling the pressure in the room tilt. Not changing depth, but changing everything else. What is going to hurt us next is not on a page. Mira had drifted to the locker again. The padlock was ruddled shut, its brass corroded to a green that looked almost gentle. The metal around it bore the faint shine of hands that had touched it 1,000 times, wondering when exactly to stop. She laid 2 fingers on the hasp and felt, through glove and steel, a small, precise percussion. Knock, as if something inside the locker wanted the courtesy of permission. Do you feel that? She asked. No, Ortiz said too fast. Surface, status? Halvorsen asked, because asking Dahl had become a way to remind herself that a world existed up there. Any drift. Radiation nominal, Dahl said. EM baseline with small ripples. ROV picking up microsilt lift near your section. Otherwise. He broke his own sentence, then rejoined it carefully. Otherwise, we're with you. Copy, Halvorsen said, and in that word, with, found a lever big enough to move a choice. She looked at the locker. We need what's inside, she said. It's either history or a hazard. Either way, it gets to decide if we leave. Tender pry, Ortiz said, already unclipping the bar. No sparks. We're not inviting anyone with bravado. As he positioned the tool, a knock came again from within, closer this time and off-tempo, as if the knocker had tried to match 323 and missed the last beat. It was small. It was very near the surface of the steel. It did not sound like a system. Renault steadied the camera. Documenting, he said, and the word had the taste of hope and apology. The pry bit under the hasp. Ortiz leaned in half a breath, then backed off, resetting to distribute the load. The lock complained, then held. Halvorsen put her hand on his shoulder, a transfer of reserve. Mira set her palm flat on the locker face and felt, beyond frequency, beyond the ears, a hollow place with a rhythm looking for a singer. On 3, Halvorsen said. 1, 2. The locker knocked. Exactly once. Not loud, just sure. 3, Halvorsen finished, and Ortiz leaned, muscles a language more honest than speech. The hasp gave with a felt pop. The lock tore free and banged the deck with a sound that made everyone overreact in small ways that wouldn't shame them later. Ortiz eased the handle. The door gripped its own frame, then opened a hand's width. A chill exhaled that had nothing to do with temperature. Their beams converged on the black. Inside, there was nothing. A coat on a hanger. The cloth dissolved into a suggestion. Shoulder boards collapsed like old epaulets. A pair of boots nested toes in, their leather almost transparent. A tin box with a crucifix scratched into the lid, empty when opened. A shaving mug glued to its shelf with calcium. On the back wall, a circle of bare metal rubbed clean by use at the height of a standing man's brow. The knock came again. From the locker. From nothing in it. 3, then 2, almost tender. As if the emptiness were tapping with a remembered skull it no longer had. Ortiz flinched backward, the pry dropping and catching on his tether. "There's nothing. There's history," Renault said hungrily, horrified at himself. Mira leaned in until her visor almost kissed the rubbed circle. She did not touch. She let the rhythm touch her through the air itself, which is to say through imagination given too much to work with. For the first time since entering the boat, she wanted to cry. It arrived not as fear but as grief, and behind the grief, anger, and behind that, the steadier thing that lets people do difficult procedures for long hours. Purpose. "Close it," Halvorsen said softly, startling them all. "If it wants to knock, it will knock through." They eased the door shut. The final click sounded like a word that did not exist in English or Russian for enough. The knock did not stop. It continued, faint and insistent, from the far side of the closed metal, as if closing had been the correct etiquette. Renault turned one more page in the book without knowing he was doing it. A note crowded the margin, the letters getting taller as they ran out of line. "Volunteers will not stop knocking." Under it, in a different, smaller hand, perhaps the captain's second, "Neither will we." Halvorsen sealed the log back into its oilcloth and slid it beneath the desk blotter, where it had lived, where it might live again if any court ever asked to see it. She put her palm flat above it for a second, the gesture halfway between oath and apology. "Vitals," she said. They answered. "Green enough." "Next," she said. "Control room. If there's power any, the bus bars will tell us. If there's motive any, the logs might show a cross-connection. We don't let a ghost run the ship." Mira took one last look at the locker. The knock had settled into a small, regular practice, like someone waiting in a hallway for a door never meant to open. She reached toward the handle, stopped a centimeter short, and curled her fingers into a fist that touched nothing. They left the captain's quarters and forced the locker once more, by principle, by procedure, only to find it as empty as before. Still the tapping continued, soft and polite, from inside the steel, following them back into the corridor like a summons no one had signed. Part 8. System reactivation. The corridor ahead narrowed to a wedge and then opened like a throat. A hatch with a sight glass blind with silt gave way under Ortiz's pry, and the control room accepted them with a stillness that was not rest. Banks of panels stepped around the space like an amphitheater facing a dead stage. Switch guards were snapped off. Placards sanded to anonymity. In the center, the plotting table's plexi lay crazed but unbroken. A rectangle of scrubbed clarity in a room lacquered by brine and time. "Surface entering control," Halvorsen said. "We're hands-on. No power indicated." "Copy," Dahl answered. "ROV on your 6 at the junction. Telemetry nominal. I'm routing the ship's logger to capture any weirdness." "Define weirdness," Ortiz said. "You'll know," Dahl said, and left it there. They swept their beams across breaker faces and bus bars with the reverence of people who had survived old machines by respecting their moods. Mira paused beside a panel labeled Glavny Rubilnik in ghost letters. Main switch. Her light revealed a smear of clean metal around the lever, as if a hand had used it after everyone agreed no one would. "Any battery banks in this class that would hold charge for decades?" she asked. "Not unless someone packed Prometheus," Ortiz said. "Everything in here is a fossil." Renault's camera panned a slate of analog meters whose needles had welded to zero by habit. He framed empty indicator sockets, careful holes where lights had once promised certainty. Over his shoulder, the plotting table's surface reflected their lamps as if it had decided, for once, to behave like glass. "Start at the bus," Halvorsen said. "If anything inside this corpse twitches, we want to know where the twitch starts." They spidered through their checklists. Mira killed a moment kneeling to brush silt from a small speaker grill at knee height, then wondered why she had done that. A speaker wants a voice. Want is not the same as consent. Ortiz lifted a junction box cover. The wires inside were cloth-sleeved and brittle. The terminals wore the white scars of salt. He set a clamp meter on a thick feeder out of superstition, knowing it would read nothing. It read nothing. Renault hovered at the chart table, filming the underside where patchwork baffles had been added. More damping, more acoustic anatomy.
He found a penciled note in a corner. Протестит бьюай зе плехи. Молчание – это тоже сигнал.
Silence is also a signal. Etta, he said softly. They designed this room to record not just commands, but the room itself. Because the room was going to talk, Halvorsen said. Not a question. The first change was small. A tremor underfoot like a cat walking across a piano in another apartment. Mira felt it in her shins. Ortiz's clamp meter buzzed for a half heartbeat and went back to dead. All three beams swung toward the plotting table. The plexi glowed. Not much. A sick room flicker, then dark, then a second breath of light from nowhere. The glow did not come from the lamps. It came from beneath the glass, as if something thin had woken like a nerve. Surface, Halvorsen said. We've got light in control without a source. Say again, Dahl replied. The deck above him creaked. Microphones translated wood into radio. Table lit for a second. No power path, Ortiz said. Clamp shows 0. Nothing on the bus. The plotting table glowed again, longer this time. Lines sprang up inside the glass like frost patterns. Thin, angular, almost map-like. They jittered, settled, then vanished, leaving afterimages on retinas and patience. Document, Renault breathed, camera already wide. The shot swam for a second with a slow, syrupy interference and then sharpened. The image recorder in his hands was honest. The world wasn't. A Geiger chirp punctured the headset. The dry, insect syllable of a dosimeter waking to speak. Mira looked down at her wrist readout. The radiation bar lifted, barely into a yellow they had no reason to expect, and then slammed down to the baseline and stayed there like a lie told for mercy. Radiation, Halvorsen asked. Spike and flatline, Mira said. If it were real, the decay curve wouldn't. Surface, you see it? Ortiz cut in. We saw the tick, Dahl said. Then nothing. Logger caught it, but the average looks like a shrug. Mira took half a step toward the main console. The indicator lenses, their little red and amber domes, were long gone, pried by time and souvenir instinct. Behind one lensless hole, something pulsed as if a moth lived in the wiring. The pulse crawled across two other empties, out of sequence with their breathing, like someone trying different doors in a hallway. Etta, Ortiz said. A warning, a question, a plea for a procedure that would make sense. Hands off live surfaces, Halvorsen said automatically, as if alive were the state these surfaces were in. Ground nothing with your suit. Keep lines clean. The hull began to hum. Not the hum of machinery. The hum of a single long knock too slow to call sound. A pressure event that found marrow first. It picked up harmonics along handrails and rack edges until the whole room played one note without committing to call it a note. Counting, Mira whispered, without meaning to. She didn't know she had heard the numbers until she knew them. Bath Chatura. Her mouth formed Russian without her deciding to. She pressed her tongue between her teeth until the habit stopped. Say that again, Halvorsen said, a strange gentleness in her request. Mira forced English back in. It's like someone far counting down. Russian numerals. Aye, from somewhere below their feet. A deck down, a room away. A voice woke, very thin, very far. Not a voice at all, but a vibration translated by bone into speech. It counted, Chaturadri de Adin. The last number did not arrive. The absence of Odin hung like a mist step on a staircase. Renault's camera shook once and steadied. Not from fear, from the sensation of a floor moving in slow motion while not moving. Surface, Halvorsen said. Did you copy any of that? Negative on voice, Dahl said. But we've got something else. Hold bridge is flagging impulse hits on the hull. Not sonar ping returns. Impact events. We're logging them now. Stand by. Stand by with what? Ortiz asked the room, which had opinions about answers. The plotting table lit again, clearer. A grid printed itself in cold phosphor. A dot blinked at a place not on the sea they were in. Another blink answered. Between the two, a crawling procession of tiny pulses connected like ants seeking sugar. The pattern lasted the length of a held breath and dissolved. Coordinates, Renault said, but not local. Inland. That's wrong. Myra's dosimeter chirped and went still. Ortiz's gave a single hiccup. Halvorson's remained stubbornly professional. The room's hum rose half a tone. The indicator holes pulsed again. Now, in a rhythm their hands had already learned against steel. 323. The hull took the beat and distributed it like a memo no one wanted to sign. A knock traveling faster than their lamps could articulate the surfaces it rode. Surface, Dahl said, too calm. Scotty to dive team. We're receiving Morse on the towed array. Morse from whom? Halvorson asked. There's nothing transmitting. Not RF, Dahl said. Not radio. It's coming through the hull. Like someone is tapping an impulse repeater. Array's mics are picking it as acoustic. We're translating. It says... He stopped, as if he had to read something twice. It says, in English, LETUSOUT. No one spoke. They had rehearsed panic by letting it arrive as a task. Now it tried to arrive as itself. Surface, Ortiz said finally, voice tight in a way it hadn't been when his gauge rattled. That's a joke. I wish, Dahl said, and forgot to shape the next sentence as radio. We're getting it again, repeat. Let US out. Same cadence. Same hand. That's not random. The reactor panel across from them did not light. It breathed. A dull red tinge moved behind the dead glass as if a coal had been placed in a box and told to be a star. Every label that had been sanded illegible became a darker illegibility, like names blacked out with a better pen. Etta, Mira began. I see it, Halvorson said. Renault swung to catch it. The camera complained with snow and then found a depth of black he didn't know optics could achieve. The red was not red like lamps. It was the idea of heat given a color and left to decide. Ortiz backed until his tank kissed a rack and came forward again because contact with anything felt like a promise no one had made. No power path, he muttered. There's no path. There's no path. Maybe the path is us, Mira said. She didn't know why until the words were out. Their bodies, their suits, their lines. Conductors in a room that had learned to harvest willingness. A breaker clacked. Not because a hand had moved it, because something underneath had flexed. The sound traveled through Halvorson's bones with the blunt intimacy of a remembered threat. Surface, she said. We're aborting. Repeat, we're. The room's far speaker, the one Mira had dusted from habit, coughed a dry syllable. Then another. It did not play voice. Played time. 3 dry ticks like a metronome with a throat condition. Then a pause. Then 2. Across the room, the plotting table blinked in time. Not a good time to be musical, Ortiz said, throat paper dry. Myra's breath fogged her visor briefly. She wiped it without thinking and realized there was nothing to wipe. The fog had been a memory. She turned her head because the room wanted her to, and saw, along the ceiling's perforated panels, a very faint constellation. The cold green ghost of phosphorescent algae clinging to paint edges. The hum made the algae waver. With each knock, the points winked, a star map blinking in rhythm. Etta, Renault said, all the apology gone, only hunger for comprehension left. The knocks are actuating the baffles. The ship is a speaker. Or a throat, Mira said. Dahl came back, professional again. Team, we're getting a secondary message. Same hand. It's slower. A click of keys on his end. A bridge officer leaning over his shoulder and not breathing. It spells SORDINATES, and then it gives numbers. This is our own position. Repeating every 10 seconds. Halvorson pictured a circle drawn around the Scotty in a book with a red pencil. She pictured something under them that could reach up without moving. What happens when the count reaches 1? She asked no one. It doesn't, Mira said, without knowing why she knew. The dosimeters chirped again, hers, then Ortiz's, then none. The reactor panel's ember brightened a fraction and then idled like a dog told to stay. The room's air, or what posed as air in their helmets, felt crowded, as if a classroom had filled with students without the door opening. Options, Halvorsen said. It sounded absurd and saved them. We can leave and pretend the sea will be less itself if we do. We can try to talk back. Or we can go to the source and pull a plug that doesn't exist. Source is the reactor, Ortiz said. If something is feeding a field into the baffles, it starts there or uses it. Or something nested there, Renault said, thinking of skulls fused to metal he had not yet seen and would later wish he had never seen. Mira listened to the not voice counting and not finishing. She felt again the urge to cry because grief had returned with the lights. If the boat is sending our coordinates, she said, it's not calling us. It's calling to where we live. It's calling the surface. Who answers? Halvorsen asked. Anyone who can hear, Dahl said quietly in all their ears. And for a second the bridge sounded like a chapel for people who had forgotten the words. Another breaker clacked. The plotting table threw a thinner line toward nothing and ate it back. The speaker gave its dry 3-2-3 and then, very softly, a fourth tick late, as if practice were becoming habit. Etta, Ortiz said. He had not used her first name underwater before. We need to go. Renault framed the red and the panel and the ghost of a system waking. We need to know, he said, desperate against better wisdom. We need to do both, Mira said. We need to get out and we need to kill anything that can do this on a schedule. Halvorsen let the hum in her bones become a clock. The worst decisions she had ever made had come from trying to be only one thing. Brave, cautious, dutiful, clever. The better ones came from holding two truths very close and letting the tension power a choice. Surface, she said. We are aborting the control room. We will regroup at the bell and prepare for a second insertion to the reactor compartment. Advise you increase perimeter and shut down any active pings. If it is ranging us, don't give it help. Copy, Dahl said. We're dark and quiet. ROV stays to watch, Halvorsen added. If the board lights again, log everything. Logged. They began to back out, careful not to turn their backs on the table. The speaker ticked one last 3-2-3 and stopped, which felt less like mercy than attention going elsewhere. As they reached the hatch, the plotting table glowed thinly once more and drew, at the edge of the glass, a child's circle around a point that was not on the Norwegian Sea. Etta, Renault said, unable not to. I saw it, she said. We can't solve two maps at once. Reactor first. At the threshold, Mira paused. The algae glow along the perforations shivered and went still the way a sleeping thing does when the room changes temperature. She found herself wanting to tell it good night. She did not. They sealed the hatch. The hum fell a degree. The corridor received them back with the restraint of a host who won't admit to having heard everything. Their lines were good. Their breaths were measured. Procedure was a raft that did not know about storms. Check vitals, Halvorsen said. They answered, green enough. The knocks trailed them like a second set of footsteps that stopped whenever they stopped. The speaker, now on the far side of a door, gave a final click so small it might have been muscle memory. Their bodies had become instruments for a room intended to make instruments of bodies. The sea around the boat felt like a crowd behind glass. On the line back to the bell, voices tightened, Ortiz arguing evacuation, Renault clinging to proof, Mira hearing that unfinished Russian one like a cliff edge, Halvorsen framing a plan no one fully believed, as the consensus hardened into a single impossible sentence. We leave now to come back armed for the reactor. Panic snapped at their fins. Discipline made it run beside them instead of ahead. Part 9, The Midnight Siege. They were 2 corridors from the bell when the boat chose its hour. Midnight arrived like a hammer wrapped in velvet. 3 crisp knocks, pause, 2, and then the rest. An avalanche of percussion traveling every surface at once. Bulkheads breathed the rhythm. Handrails ticked like teeth. The entire submarine spoke in knocks, the code made into weather. Surface, Halvorsen began. Copy you on. Dahl's reply shattered into paper-thin static, a dry snow that tasted metallic in their ears. Then silence. The strobes on their markers dimmed and died. Their lamps guttered to half and then thinner, as if the water had learned appetite. The only light left was a faint constellation of phosphorescent algae blooming along perforations and edges, cold green dust stars. Behind them, in the torpedo bay, the skull's rubbed brows caught that glow and held it, a low aurora across bone. "Hold the line," Halvorsen ordered, and nobody had to be told twice. Their umbilicals bowed like taut wire in the subtle new current of a room building a throat. The Nox ran ahead of them down the corridor and back again as if hurting. When Mira turned to check the bay, a small shape drifted in the hatchway. A skull rotating slowly in the thin light, the polished oval on its brow shining like a monk's tonsure. It touched the frame, tack, and stopped, as if it had made its point. "Keep moving," Halvorsen said. "Green checks every 20 seconds. She tried to count the 20 and found other numbers in her mouth. Chitteratri. She clamped her jaw until the Russian stopped. A hand caught Myra's suit at the small of her back, steady and cold. The precise squeeze of someone who knows how to guide a diver through a jam. She half turned, expecting Ortiz. No one was there. Her camera feed showed her body jerk and correct. Nothing touching, nothing close. "Etta," she said, too calm. "Something just handled me." "Negative contact," Ortiz said automatically and immediately regretted speaking, because telling the water what it wasn't felt like provocation. The pressure in the corridor changed pitch. A musician sliding a bow across a metal string. It wasn't more. It was nearer. The Nox braided into a rolling thunder that never got loud, only specific. Every seam became a teacher. Every plate remembered what it had been taught. They rounded the next turn into the aft junction. Ahead, the hatch to their entry corridor, the route back to the bell. Ortiz reached it first, grabbed the wheel, and pulled. It moved a fraction and locked as if a hand on the other side had simply closed around it and decided otherwise. "Don't force," Halvorsen said, and the order could not contain her need. Ortiz forced because doors should be more afraid of him than he is of them. The wheel scuffed, budged, and then stopped dead. He felt the peculiar intimacy of torque moving into something that was not mechanism. The hatch did not hold because of metal. It held because of intention. "Surface hatch jam," Halvorsen said, and the system responded with the exact same static as before, as if the radio had learned to be a room too. "Cut over to backup." Dahl's voice arrived through murk, as if spoken from another boat inside theirs. "You're..." Then that same snow, a winter of paper tearing inside the wire. The algae brightened a degree. A low ripple ran through the floor plates under their boots, up the opposite bulkhead, over their heads. A slow circle that mapped their outline. The submarine was drawing their silhouettes by knock. Myra's hand found the wheel beside Ortiz's. Together they throttled muscle against will. The wheel gave half a spoke and stopped. An old drunk who surprises you with a second wind. From far down the corridor, a hollow child's knock answered 3, a pause, and then 2, the final 2 slightly late, as if the learner had been distracted and corrected. Renault's camera caught a wash of interference that snowed and cleared. "We're being documented," he said, unable to stop mouthing the magic. "It's recording us in percussion." "Save the poetry for the surface," Ortiz said. "Help me earn us a surface." They fell to procedure because procedure is what you carry when belief falls out of your pocket. Halvorsen set a strobe out of habit. It glowed for a second and went dark, a candle remembering itself. She clipped a new route marker and drew a dot on her slate, "Jam here," as if marks could build a ladder tall enough to climb out of tide. Behind them, the skull in the torpedo hatch rolled back into the bay like a chess piece moved by a reasonable adversary. The glow traced the curve of it. Other skulls had oriented toward the corridor. Their brows made a little runway of sick light. "Try the bypass forward," Halvorsen said. "Deck ladder, up one, then over, then down." They moved toward the ladder. The Nox followed, not chasing, not driving, escorting. At the foot of the ladder, the rungs felt slicker than water could account for. Myra's glove slipped. She tried again, and this time her hand found purchase as if the ladder had yielded consent. She ascended 3 rungs. Between the third and fourth, her boot froze to the rail. Not caught, held. "Stop," Halvorsen said. Everyone did. She turned her light on Myra's ankle. Nothing visible held it. Nothing pressed. The umbilical hung free. Then her boot released as if a hand had let go. "I hate this," Ortiz said, as if hate could reverse the polarity. "Climb," Halvorsen said. "Now." They made the landing into a patch of quiet the size of a kitchen table. The knocks attenuated to a distant practice. The algae stars dimmed. In that stillness they could hear, distantly, in their bones, a counting that had lost its last number. "Surface," Halvorsen tried again. "Scotty, respond." "You read?" The reply chopped and stitched. "We copy something." Array still receiving impulse text. Same hand. Repeating your position and a long swallow of static. "FORCAPTAIN. Then repeats. "For Captain," Renault said, like a dedication note, or a salutation. "For decision," Halvorsen said. The word made her shoulders settle. They took the bypass over and down into the next corridor toward the bell. The way felt longer. Corridors that had measured 20 paces yesterday took 30 now, or else their bodies had learned a newer, smaller step humans use in places they don't belong. At the final turn, the bell corridor opened ahead. A dark row of handrails and a bright round window. Holmes' coin, a promise of up. Ortiz laughed once. A dry bark made of relief he refused to name. He lengthened his stride. The hatch before the bell had closed itself. Not fully enough to be unambiguous. The wheel had turned 2 spokes. Silt still hung in the water beyond it like a curtain waiting to be drawn back. "Did we?" Renault started. "No," Mira said. "We left it open." Ortiz set his shoulder to it. The wheel did not move. He set the spreader. His jaws bit paint and slid. He reset and squeezed. The metal of the spreader bowed. The door made the sound of an old man who has decided to sleep through the day. "Etta," Ortiz said, breath shallow. "It's not a jam. It's a hold." The knocks returned not from the hatch, around it. The hull behind them ticked 323. The deck beneath them returned with 2. The ceiling above gave the final 3, late by a beat. They were inside a metronome with a malfunctioning heart. Renault slipped the camera against the port and caught his own ghost face doubled by the curve. Beyond, the bell hung a few meters away, a yellow lantern in black water. Its small external strobe pulsed slow and faithful, unconcerned with ghosts, an honest machine. "Surface, bell hatches locked against," Halvorsen said, keeping her voice level so it would have something to climb. "We're field jammed." "We see you on ROV," Dahl said. Every syllable a plank. "Bell is free. External hatch appears unlatched. We can send line tension." "No," Halvorsen said. "We don't jerk a door a hand is holding." She breathed. "We need to reset the room." "How?" Ortiz asked. Mira put her palm to the hatch. The cold was parental. She tapped once, not to talk but to mark her presence. The hatch answered immediately, 3 small, almost consoling taps. She felt the impulse travel up her arm, salt to bone. "We're instruments," she said. "Stop playing and maybe it loses interest. Or it plays harder," Ortiz said. "We need a breaker this thing cares about." Halvorsen stared down the dim corridor toward the control room. The glow along the ceiling perforations had returned, faint as the underside of a cloud. The knocks continued, now not everywhere at once but across the ship like a message being routed by a bored but competent operator. "Etta," Renault said softly, as if asking a personal favor, "if this is a siege, it doesn't end with us at a door. It ends when the orchestra loses its conductor," Halvorsen said, stating the thing she had been trying not to know since the plotting table had glowed. She turned to them, and in her visor their own lamps reflected like a constellation she could arrange with a sentence. "We go to the core. The reactor compartment," Ortiz said, an oath and a geography. "We do it with procedure," Halvorsen said. "If something is driving a field through the baffles, it's concentrated there. We shut it down or break ourselves trying. But we don't wait to be let out. Waiting is the trick." Dahl's voice cut back in like a masthead light through fog. Team, be advised. Array now copying secondary impulses from your compartment. New text. It spells OPEN and then stops. Then STAY and stops. Then repeats for captain. Your vitals are... Static smeared the next words. Mira, your heart rate. Green enough, Mira said. Her hand still hummed from the hatch's little apology. She flexed her fingers. They belonged to her again. Ortiz looked back at the bell. A circle so close a hand wanted to reach in and scratch sleep from its eyes. He turned from it like a man turning from a window at dawn because work has decided night isn't done. We're going the wrong way, he said. We're going the only way, Halvorsen answered. They moved as a single object, lines balanced, voices reduced to function. The submarine knocked them along. Not pushy, not gentle. Attentive, like a teacher waiting to see if the student will choose the right door without prompting. As they passed the torpedo bay again, the skull at the seam lifted a millimeter in some minor current and tapped the crack. One small, sure token of approval. For a blink, the polished brows along the sling line seemed brighter, as if the algae had decided to praise. In the cross-junction before control, something cold found Myra's calf and closed there. She did not struggle. She examined the grip the way you examine a tool you didn't buy. Let go, she said, not in Russian, not in English, but in the tone good nurses use with patients who have already decided to get well. The cold released. The corridor rewarded her with a small knock. Renault's camera failed for a count of 4 and returned with a smeared frame of the plotting table that he would later swear showed, for one impossible field of depth second, a curve of fused pale ovals around a round red glow. He blinked. The snow cleared. The table was only glass, the room only room, the hum only the long knock stretched to a note. They reached the hatch to control. It had closed itself like the others. Ortiz reached for the wheel. It turned without fight, as if the room had invited them in. The door opened. The glow inside was tinder red at the reactor panel, a small, patient ember. Surface, Halvorsen said. We're going to the reactor. If you lose us, you keep listening. If something comes up from this trench, you run. Copy, Dahl said. And they could hear men on the bridge not moving so their breaths would not argue with the microphone. We're with you. Let's earn that, Halvorsen said. The knocks quieted as if the ship had folded its hands in its lap. The algae stars steadied. Somewhere aft, very distant, the skulls gave a last small practice, 3, pause, 2, and went reverent. At the threshold of control, with the bell behind them sealed by a will that wasn't metal and the ship's attention turning like a head toward the core, Halvorsen leveled her lamp down the ladder to the reactor chamber and said the sentence no one wanted and everyone had been building. Source or nothing. We go. Part 10, the reactor chamber. The ladder dropped into a colder dark. Their lamps made cones on enamel and lead paint that had kept their color by refusing to admit to years. The knocks thinned to a background habit, like someone in another room keeping time for a song that would arrive later. Surface descending to reactor level, Halvorsen said. Voice clipped to fit through wire. Expect interference. Copy, Dahl answered. Array still reading impulse text at intervals. We're quiet and with you. The last rung found a grating. Water hushed around their ankles with that peculiar interior sound ships have when they remember they were built to hold breath. Ahead, a hatch wore a radiation trefoil sanded to suggestion. Someone had added, by a pen already empty, the word Thisha, quieter. The wheel turned without argument, the etiquette of a door that knows you're coming regardless. They entered a room that had been designed to be an argument ender. Everything here was mass and seal and intent. A primary shield barrel like a black pillar, piping like arteries that had learned patience, racks of instruments with their eyes put out. Beyond the central drum, behind a sheet of armored glass cracked like ice but intact, the reactor shroud rose like a cowl. Its window, where once operators peered to see the ghost of Cherenkov through coolant, showed a red not of light but of decision. A coal at the bottom of a well, a star refusing to die properly. Geiger, Halvorsen said. Myra's dosimeter chirped twice. Then the bar flattened to a mercy. Ortiz's gave half a hiss and thought better of it. Nominal, Mira reported, and wanted to bite the word in half. They moved to the glass. The red glowed with the self-respect of something that could devour you if it remembered how. Along the inside of the shroud, at human head height, a ring of pale ovals had fused themselves to metal dozens, each an arch of frontal bone. Not placed, grown into, around the backside too, vanishing into the curve, an aureole of skull brows mortared to steel, each polished at the same patch. Eye sockets faced inward, empty and intent, as if a congregation watched the altar. Renault stopped too fast and steadied himself with the camera, then kept filming because that was the only honest thing he owned. They fixed them here, he said, breath ascape. They made a chorus. Ortiz swore in the dialect his grandmother had used to thank God. Heat case was never designed to carry that load, he said, engineering clinging to him like a coat. This is a field instrument now, a resonator. The next knock came not from bulkhead or deck. It came from the shroud itself, a low, true percussive that traveled through the glass to their teeth. The skull ring did not move. The sound was not of impact. It was of something inside beating on its own walls with the memory of bone. Mira felt the pattern without translation. She didn't hear numbers as much as she knew them, how a diver knows depth by lungs before gauges. 3, she said. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. Her mouth formed Russian again before she grabbed it back. And then, coordinates. It's spelling them as a runout. Whose? Halvorsen asked. Mira gave numbers. Dahl confirmed from above, voice careful to be a straight line. Those are ours, he said. Scotty position plus drift. It's updating live. The shroud knocked again. Between pulses, a thinner tick threaded through, like fingernails tapping on a small tin. Renault swung the camera. His beam found the source. On the shroud's lower flange, tucked behind conduit, a single skull cap separate from the fused ring, wired to a transducer pad with antique leads. Its rubbed brow touched metal with tender insistence, keeping time like a metronome carved from grief. I will be very happy when that is over, Ortiz said. The reactor panel on their side, dead glass and ghost needles, woke a shade more. In the empty holes where bulbs had been, a pulse crawled, mothlight inside the wiring. The bus bars remained still, but the room behaved as if power had chosen a superstition to inhabit. Surface, Halvorsen said. We have field activity at the core. No measurable heat. No conventional power path. Acoustic output is coordinated. Copy, Dahl said, and then, without format, what do you need? For it to not be a countdown, Halvorsen said. Behind the glass, the skull ring gave nothing of movement and everything of attention. The knocks lengthened a hair, spread into a phrase with a hole where the last word should be. On every other deck of this boat, the one had never arrived. Here, the absence of one felt like an agreement. Renault floated nearer to the glass. If you were building a voice out of a machine, he whispered to no one, you'd put the mouth where the machine cannot lie. He touched the glass with his glove and listened with bone. Inside, the red flared a breath brighter and settled. The thin skull clicked 323, a student correcting its hand. Halvorsen made herself catalog because cataloging cuts holes in panic big enough to walk through. We have a core shroud behaving as a Helmholtz body. Human bone installed as a tone generator coupled to structure. A field that turns knocks into a carrier. A ship designed to swallow sound retuned to export it. The control room was the switchboard. This is the transmitter. Transmitter to who? Ortiz asked. Then, no. To what? Dahl's voice came small now, the way a voice does when a deck is listening to a bridge. We're still copying the text, he said. It alternates. Let US out. Coordinates. For captain. Then repeats. The cadence is steadying. For captain, Renault murmured. He had read the log. He had said the words aloud. He refused. They address him anyway. The room gathered a hum below the knocks, a continuous pressure like the least storm tide. The algae along the ceiling perforations shimmered in sympathy this deep. Even that cold life was an instrument. Mira pressed her visor closer to the glass until she could imagine warmth on her face. Inside, through circlets of empty eyes, the red deepened at the center as if a heart somewhere tried to find itself. With each pulse, faint ripples ran outward on surfaces that should not ripple. "It's not heat," she said. "It's choice. The system wants a one. It wants to finish." "If it finishes, what happens?" Ortiz asked. The reactor didn't answer with physics. It answered with a knock that traveled outward through the hull and came back with an echo from below, as if the trench itself had knocked back. It was big. It was slow. It was very far down. "Surface," Halvorsen said, and it cost her to keep her breath measured. "Any bathy anomalies directly beneath our position?" "Stand by," Dahl said, and the small half-silence while men looked for the sea under a sea was worse than static. "We're seeing a density discontinuity at 200 meters below the wreck," he said finally, voice careful. "Could be a void or a sediment pocket. Could be scarp geometry. It's regular, circular-ish. We didn't have it on the first pass." "Locked under the wreck," Ortiz said softly. "It's calling that." Renault had seen ancient bells set into the floors of French churches, resonators for prayers. He had seen war memorials where names had been weathered to the kinship of stone with rain. He looked at the ring of skulls and the way their sockets faced the core, obedient to a center. "What rises," he said, "might not be the boat." "What rises," Mira said, "might be something the boat made room for." They were not trained for this sentence. Stop a ritual. They approached it the way they approached a valve you can't see. Procedure, then purpose, then risk. "Options," Halvorsen said. "We can run and hope midnight moves on without us. We can talk to a machine in a language it carved into human bone. We can cut the wire to the transducer. Or we can kill the field at the source." "Kill the field how?" Ortiz asked, already angry at his own hunger to try. "Interrupt resonance," Halvorsen said. "Break the ring. Break the mouth. Break the chamber." "The skulls?" Renault said, horrified and greedy for proof in the same heartbeat. Mira put 2 fingers to the glass over one socket as if to close an eye and couldn't. "Break what this room asks for," she said. "It asks for a one. It asks for completion." The shroud knocked a sequence that made sense even before she translated. Numbers that were an address. Numbers that were a name. "Those are not just our coordinates," she said. "They're corrected to account for drift, time of day, and sound velocity in water. It's navigating to us from below. It's honing. When the count hits that missing one, the lock completes." "Then we do not let it," Halvorsen said. "Surface," Ortiz called. "Prep to cut lines if we go loud. That trench pocket under us might cough. We might need you up and gone." "We're ready," Dahl said, quiet and close. "Say when." The words go loud reorganized the air. On the ship above, men picked up wrenches they didn't need to hold because hands need work at the edge of prayer. Down here, Halvorsen put her gloved palm flat to the glass, a benediction and a threat. "We go in stages," she said. "Minimal intervention first. Kill the little metronome. It's an injector. If the shroud keeps knocking without it, we escalate. Ortiz, you cut. Mira, you hold. Renault, you film. If the room hates what we do, it will tell us. We listen and do it anyway." "You sure?" Ortiz asked. "No," Halvorsen said. "That's why it's worth doing." They found access at a side panel. A service hatch gummed but surrendering to the pry. Inside, the transducer wiring had a dignity born of competence. Cloth-sleeved leads, screw terminals torqued with love, a little drawing hand-penciled on the inside cover. Plus to skull, minus to ground. Ortiz's hands grew very careful. "On 1, he said. 3, 2. He did not say 1. He cut the lead. The thin skull stopped knocking. The room paused a fraction of a breath, the way a crowd does when a soloist falters and then keeps singing. The shroud's deeper pulse continued. The red core brightened as if the system had merely raised its own volume to compensate for the missing section. "Minimal not enough," Halvorsen said. "Next, break the ring," Renault asked, and heard how the word break sounded like treason and medicine. Not desecrate, Halvorsen said, and did not examine the ethics of that verb in a room built specifically to erase ethics. Interrupt the circle. 1 point. Mira had the small spreader in her hand before she knew she meant to. She looked at a brow polished to mirror. She pictured hands pressing it 1,000 times. She pictured that pressure making language. I'm sorry, she said to no one and everyone. The tool's jaws found seam and bone. She squeezed. The skull did not crack. It let go, a sudden, ugly sound of adhesion failing, like a jar opening after years. The oval came away slick with a film that was not biology and not machine. Behind it, the shroud metal showed a bare rectangle rubbed clean. The room hit them with a pressure event, not hostile but corrective. The knocks stumbled for 1 beat, then recovered at a slightly lower amplitude, as if the choir had shifted parts. The red glow in the core hiccuped and then steadied. Still singing, Ortiz said. It's distributing around the gap. Again, Halvorsen said. They pried another, and a third. With each interruption, the shroud's tone changed but did not stop. It was a system, not a superstition. It had been built to expect loss. Dahl's voice returned like a line thrown into cold water. Team, the array shows drift in your impulse stability. Something you're doing is hurting its signal but not killing it. The trench echo is adjusting. We're getting a phase match from below. What does that mean? Renault asked. It means it's smarter than a mirror, Ortiz said. He wiped at nothing on his visor. Mira stared through the glass at the red, which now looked like a coin viewed through water. We're changing harmonics, she said. But the carrier is still alive. The room itself is the mouth. The skulls are diction. Renault angled his camera to catch her face and the unsleeping ring and the coal. Then, he couldn't make himself say what the word then wanted. Then we go to the source, Halvorsen said. We kill the shroud. That will vent coolant, Ortiz said automatically. If any coolant remains. If it does, Halvorsen said. It's a memory like everything else in this boat. We are not melting fuel. We are breaking a drum. Tooling, Mira asked. Ortiz held up the cutter. The blade looked ridiculous against a reactor. We can't cut the barrel, he said. But auxiliary bracing, baffle mounts, yes. We make it lopsided and ugly. Resonance hates ugly. Surface, Halvorsen said. We're about to make noise. Understood, Dahl said. No sermon, just faith. They opened an access panel beneath the viewing slit. Inside, a web of braces held the shroud to the world. Each brace had been retrofitted with something that looked like a piezo puck welded on by a believer. Ortiz set the cutter on the nearest bolt. Sparks were impossible at this depth. The idea of sparks occurred anyway. He leaned in. The bolt turned a quarter, half, then shrieked in a frequency too clean to be heard and came loose. The hum dipped and recovered. Mira took another. Halvorsen a third. The ring of skulls stayed intent, like parishioners bracing as scaffolding shifted. Renault filmed and counted without numbers. The room tried to hold itself together. They tried to teach it away from holding. The knocks changed. They came faster, then slower, then in a wild stutter as the ship redistributed demand. The red coal flared in a long, offended breath and dimmed, not extinguished, but less certain. Array reading signal degradation, Dahl said, words hitting their ears like warm hands. The trench echo is losing lock. Repeat, losing lock. Keep going, Halvorsen said. A brace snapped. The shroud shivered like a bell struck at an angle. The coal faltered again. Something answered from below. One massive, slow percussive per minute, like a heart unwilling to hurry. The hatch behind them sighed as if someone had leaned on it from the corridor side. The algae on the ceiling gave a faint, nervous sparkle. Mira braced herself against the glass, put the cutter on a bolt that had been painted with a tiny red dot by some Soviet technician who had believed in systems. Sorry, she said again and turned. The dot vanished into the idea of removed. Surface, Ortiz panted, as if breath mattered in a helmet. If we finish this and the signal dies, you go. That's not a suggestion. If we blow something stupid and the trench coughs, you go faster. Copy, Dahl said. We will pretend we were never here. The shroud sagged a degree. The ring of skulls, still fused where they were fused, now looked less like a halo and more like wreckage of a halo. The knocks inside became angry for one beat and then reorganized, which was worse. A parallel channel opened. A thin, human-scale tapping that ran along the glass beneath Myra's hand. 3, 2, 3. Please, spelled in bone that had never held a prayer book. What rises? Renault asked again, hoarse. What are we denying? A boat? A cage? Them? Mira felt the answer in her wrist. Not in words, in that grief that had accompanied them like ballast. We are denying it the last word, she said. Whatever's below, if it comes up, it will go where these coordinates point. It will come up to us or for us. We end the sentence before the period. Halvorsen set her cutter to the final brace she could reach. On my mark, she said, we take it together. Then we evaluate. If the carrier dies, we leave. If it doesn't, we escalate to measures we didn't plan for. Which are? Ortiz asked. Breaking the barrel, she said. Or dying ornately. Let's try the first. They cut. The shroud tilted a millimeter you could feel in the back teeth. The coal fell to embers. The choir thinned to a whisper that was still a language. Array shows collapse, Dahl said, awe threading the clip. Signal is hold trench echo attenuating. Phase match is broken. Is broken. It's... He became breath, then voice again. We lost the lock. The reactor room exhaled. The algae calmed. The knocks dropped to the far corners of the hull like rain moving out to sea. For a beat, none of them breathed. Not from physics, from astonishment. Then the reactor knocked once. Only once. A single, deep, perfect one. The sound went through their bones and out into the trench. Below them, something answered, very far away, very large, with a knocking that was not a knock at all, but a door deciding it had been a door long enough. The coal brightened, not to what it had been, to something deciding. The skull ring, voiceless and inward, held attention the way an audience holds air before the curtain falls. Surface, Halvorsen said. Voice thin not from fear, but from the size of the thing in it. We may have taken too long. Team, Dahl said, and his discipline was a bridge they could cross while the world rearranged itself. Impulses returning. New text. It's spelling your ship's designation over and over. It reads like a knock-knock at a door with our name on it. Mira reached toward the glass and stopped her hand a centimeter short of what she could not comfort. The room wanted completion. The trench wanted ascent. Somewhere between those two wants lay a choice that would sentence the next hour. Options, Halvorsen said again, because naming them makes them less like weather. We can leave and drag this to the surface with us. Or we can end it here. How? Ortiz asked. He knew. He wanted permission to say it. By making sure the shroud never resonates again, Halvorsen said. By turning this voice into rubble. Explosives. Manual trigger. Renault swiveled his camera to her. Some part of him, small and ashamed, wanted the footage of a sacrifice rather than the act itself. He turned the lens down, forcing himself not to be a witness when a hand would be more useful. The red in the core flickered as if amused. The thin skull on the transducer, its lead cut. Tapped anyway, no wire, just bone and habit. 3, 2, 3. The knock circled the room like a question and came to rest in Halvorsen's throat. We choose now, she said, the glow touching her visor with a ghost of heat. Destroy the reactor and silence the last word, or let it finish and see what rises to meet us. Part 11, The Sacrifice. No one said sacrifice. The room said it for them. The reactor shroud trembled on its loosened braces, the ember at its heart deepening and paling like a breath someone had learned to take slowly. The ring of fused brows stared inward with a patience beyond obedience. Along the viewing glass, the thin, unwired skull ticked 323, not through current, not through wire, but through what a habit becomes when it survives all reasons. Options, Halvorsen said a third time, because the word built a floor. We silence the field now, permanently, or we let the count finish and see what answers from the trench. Permanent, Ortiz said. He had already unclipped the orange case. Within, neatly belted, lay what salvage divers call help when metal refuses. Compact linears and cutting pads sealed for depth. A shaped kiss of force meant for doors that think too highly of themselves. He did not say their names. He did not say how many. He touched them like prayer beads. We place them on the bracing we've already loosened. We collapse the shroud into its own throat. Remote fire if the field will let it. Manual if it won't. Renault's lamp shook, steadied. There must be a third way. A disassembly with. There isn't time, Halvorsen said, and did the arithmetic of their gauges. The new ache in her molars. The sound of a number that had never arrived circling the room, looking for a place to land. Surface, she added, voice level. We're preparing to end transmission at source. If we lose comms, if anything rises, do not wait for us to finish a sentence. Silence from the bridge lifted into speech. We copy, Dahl said. Scotty is ready to be a rumor. The knocks spaced themselves, suddenly formal, like a teacher rapping for quiet before roll call. Across the ship the code went to half tempo, then quarter, then to the minimal sufficient to say I am here. Mira watched the change with a recognition that felt like a betrayal. It's listening, she said. It hears we've chosen. It wants to know who will stay. Stay, Ortiz snapped, as if the syllable were an insult. We set timers. Mira shook her head. You heard the room in control. What happened to the speaker when we dusted it? It acts up around us. It uses us. It stalls around us. It'll stall a signal that doesn't belong to a body it recognizes. It wants a hand. It wants a presence. She touched her chest with a gloved thumb, as if proving to the boat there was a pulse in there. Steel remembers what dies inside it. It wants someone living to join the memory of the last word. No, Halvorsen said, too fast. The first unprocedural thing she had said since they left the bell. No one stays. They brought out the pads anyway. Work organizes fear. Ortiz passed them. Halvorsen and Mira laid them in a triangle around the shroud base. One by the panel they'd opened, kissing the brace they'd cut. One at the opposite mount with the red-dotted bolt. One under the viewing slit where the glass met the collar, the pad's dull face turned toward a job it had not been designed to do. Renault filmed and hated himself correctly for filming. Leads, Ortiz said, moving like a man at a bench in a storm. We route to the door. We stay outside the worst. We crack the glass and shroud and break the drum. We ride the rebound to the bell. And if the field eats the fire line? Mira asked quietly. Then we try again, Ortiz said. The thin, unwired skull ticked, shy and perfect. Please, in a cadence even a child would learn. Halvorsen's mouth moved and made a sentence she had not planned. I'll hold the line if it fails. She discovered the truth as she said it. It surprised her and did not. I brought you here. I send you up. Myra's no arrived almost at the same time, lighter, inexorable. You're the one the boat wants a word from, she said. Everything down here says for captain. That isn't a rank. It's a responsibility. You carry the proof. You carry the report. You already refused once in your life. You get to refuse again and live with it properly. She checked Ortiz's work with practiced touch, then broke the ritual by squeezing his forearm. I'm the one it put a hand on. I'm the one it counts through. I'm the small body that fits past the panel if something binds. Her visor found Halvorsen's. I'm staying. You're 25, Halvorsen said. I'm 61. The room doesn't care, Mira said gently. It cares which door opens. Renault began to say her name and couldn't. He took his fingers off the record toggle because decency sometimes arrives late and sometimes it still arrives. Ortiz's jaw worked, chewing a word that had no teeth. Timers, he said again, because if he said it enough it would be true. He took out the firing device, a dull box with a grip, and stared at it as if it had exceeded its mandate by existing at depth. Mira spoke over the knocks, which had gone to a near hush around them, as if the ship had made a room in its noise for one small conversation. If I stay, it gives you a window. If it thinks someone is in the mouth, it will keep the rest of the hull polite for a breath. You've seen it, it helps and holds and herds. Let it shepherd you out. No one is fed to a machine, Halvorsen said, sudden and helpless, as if hearing herself across years she had not anticipated. Not on my command. You didn't build this, Mira said. You can end it. Ortiz looked from the pads to the shroud to the little skull that ticked without wire, and something old in him decided he preferred guilt to helplessness. He put the firing box in Myra's hand. If this is theater, he said, dragging sarcasm over a wound, you're the only one who can hit your cues. Her palm accepted the weight, felt like a tool and like a promise. She clipped its lead to the harness ring at her chest as if to keep it from floating away, then reached to Halvorsen and closed their fingers over the same piece of line, like two people at a bedside. You taught me to count when the room tries to count me, she said. Count your way up. Halvorsen reached for the box, for any lever, for time, and found none. She placed her free hand on the glass instead, over the red that had almost learned to be a light. Through the glove, through the pain, the pressure of the room pressed back. Not a hand, not a plea, not a force. Tension. If you stay, she said, you do it on my order. You do it for the report. You do it to end a sentence that should never have been started. You do it because you are the most stubborn creature I have ever put a helmet on. She inhaled once, anchor and sail. And you do it now before I stop you. Mira nodded once, as if accepting a spoon to swallow a medicine. She reached for the hatch wheel that would put the others on the corridor side. The Nox lifted a little, curious. She turned the wheel. Ortiz moved before she could, because decency also sometimes remembers its job. He put his shoulder into the door and swung it, then stepped backward into the passage, hauling Renault with his tether. I'll hate you forever, he said, somewhere between laugh and sob. That's the deal. Renault faced her square, that ridiculous camera bobbing like a periscope when a sea comes up. He didn't lift it. He saluted instead, an awkward European thing that turned into a small bow because his shoulder didn't remember the other shape. J.E. Tamoyne, he said. I will testify. Mira smiled, a small, feral tilt. Make it boring, she said. Make it sound like paperwork. That's how you beat a secret. Halvorsen stayed in the threshold one beat too long, every training impulse fighting the older law that says you do not leave the best of you in a bad room. Mira leaned forward, almost touched helmet to helmet, stopped a centimeter short, and spoke softly, so softly that Bone had to carry it. Tell them steel remembers, but people refuse. Then she pushed the door with 2 fingers, as if closing a sleeping child's bedroom. It sealed with the fatigued dignity of old steel. The dogs settled with little pewter clicks. The knocks resumed at a respectful distance, as if the hull had been asked to wait outside. Surface, Halvorsen said, and the steadiness returned to her voice because someone had to be a ladder. We're moving to the bell. Timer in play. Expect pressure transients. Copy, Dahl said. We're with. He stopped, then adjusted how he existed and said only, we hear you. Inside the room, the red coal pulsed. The thin skull made its gentle plea, and the ring watched. Mira set her back to the glass and faced the door, alone with mass and intent. She unclipped the firing lead from her harness ring and tested the trigger once with the safety on, to feel the spring load engage. Spoke a small, honest click into her glove. The boat's attention wandered over her like a dog deciding where to lie. She moved along the viewing glass and touched each pad in turn, flattening the last curl of their edges, as if making a bed. The unwired skulls ticking synced to her breath without her consent. She let it, then counted in the other language, the one that had learned her mouth earlier, Piet, Chetire, try, and waited for the missing number to suggest itself. It did not. From beyond the door, through the metal, down the corridor and up the ladder and along the line, she felt the weight of her team moving, Ortiz shouldering his curses, Renault keeping the camera off, Halvorsen mapping the way to the bell with marks their bodies could trust. The knocks in the hallway softened to a courtesy tap-tap, like neighbors hearing grief and lowering their voices. She pressed her visor to the glass. The red inside the shroud looked close enough to warm her faceplate. She addressed the skull ring without theater. "I know you want out," she said, "but you do not get up. Not this time. Not by this route. Not in this name." She placed her palm next to the little unwired dome, matching its rhythm and denying it, beat for beat. The boat tested the room's edges around her. A small pressure at her calf, a whisper along the glass, a friendly tug on the firing lead. She refused all offers the way you refuse gifts that come with debt. A new knock arrived from below. One single, slow percussive, patient and enormously polite, as if a door very far down had leaned to listen. The red brightened on that beat. The skull ring felt. She could not say leaned forward. There were no muscles left in it. Attention sharpened. Something in the field leaned toward one. Mira breathed. She thought of a corridor where a glove on steel had learned its first pulses. She thought of tally marks under chalk in a dead man's stateroom. She thought of the rubbed ovals and the word Stuchith. "Do not knock," scratched by a hand that had knocked too long to be believed. She thought of Halvorson's hand on hers, a line out of a bad room. She thought of her grandfather in a yard of wrecks, saying that steel remembers what dies inside it, and decided that memory could be forced to remember refusals too. "All right," she said to the red. Together, she lifted the safety cover. The firing box sat calm in her hand, a square of choice disguised as a tool. She set her knuckles against the viewing glass, over the place where the pads met the shroud, and, because words matter even at depth, knocked 3 times. The sound went into the room and the room gave it back in the same breath. She answered with 2. The red flared, hungry for the third answer that would make the figure complete. She did not give it. She squeezed the trigger instead. For a human ear, there is no sound to the charge at depth, only the absolute instant in which all the water in the room learns a new instruction and obeys. The pads slammed their force into metal. The glass bowed, fractured into a spiderweb of brilliant geometry, held a fraction, and surrendered in a sheet. The shroud brackets leapt inward, then sideways, the collar yawed. The loosened braces tore and translated their failure into a cough that was not air but pressure. The ring of fused brows tore from their seats in jagged, obscene petals. Some held, some flew, some remained and sang a last warped note that wasn't language, only physics refusing philosophy. The unwired skull shattered mid-tick, a small pottery sound amplified to the size of ritual. The red went out like a candle pinched by large fingers. Pressure punched the room, then reversed as the new cavity demanded water. The wave hit Mira and put her into the door she had locked. Her shoulder and the door agreed on pain. The firing lead snapped free and snaked away like a surprised eel. She reached, not for it, for the glass, for the room, for anything to complete a gesture she hadn't known she intended. The hull sang once, a low bell beyond numbers. Somewhere in the trench, the patient knock that had answered earlier paused, as if considering whether the conversation had ended, and then fell silent. "Surface pressure transient," Dahl said, far away and very loud, a man shouting across a field. "We are seeing white on the logger, repeat, we're blinded, then drop. Array shows collapse of carrier. Echo from trench, decaying, decaying." Mira lay with her helmet pressed to the cooled collars of what had been the shroud. The new water around her choked with glitter. Glass, bone, lacquer, years made particulate. The skull ring was no longer a ring, no longer an anything, only proof of force applied to purpose. In the glass that remained, the red did not return. In the field that had filled the room, appetite had been uninvited. Her gauges went from numbers to shapes, from shapes to nothing she trusted. She could still hear. In hearing, she could still count. In counting, she could still refuse. She rapped the back of her glove, once, against the broken frame, a small, uninflected, utterly human knock that asked nothing and ended nothing and belonged to no code but its own. 1. She laughed. A ridiculous, exhausted bark that fogged nothing. The room did not answer. "Good. Etta?" Ortiz panted into the net. Somewhere between tears and angry prayer, charges fired. The field, holy God, the field is up, Halvorson said, an order that was a blessing. Up now. Mira turned her head enough to see the door. She did not reach for it. She set the box down where a hand might find it later and think it a relic of something useful. She placed her palm on the glassless frame and, with that hand, told the steel a story short enough to fit under pressure. We are not instruments. We are players. We finish on our own terms. She heard them leaving, the tug of lines, the small curses, the professional lies we tell ourselves that say we will see each other as if the sentence could be enforced by grammar alone. She did not say goodbye. The boat liked words too much. The room settled. Fragments drifted down like a weird snow. The cold drew her into its thinking. She imagined, inexplicably, that somewhere up the ladder the algae stars were dimming, comforted by a new quiet. She imagined Renaud would find the right sentence and then choose to file it behind a dull title. She imagined Ortiz fixing a roof. She imagined Halvorsen, gray-streaked and stubborn, choosing silence as a signal and living with it like a proper captain. She rested her fist where the shroud had sung. The door on the far side of the glass she had closed, the one that led back to breath, unauthorized itself from her map. She thought of numbers, of how one is both beginning and end, and of how kind it felt to hear it once, properly, in a room that had never let it happen. She knocked a final time, not in any code, not for any listener the sea could permit, just for the record steel keeps whether we ask it to or not. The trench answered with light no human eye could see. Pressure as white as a star, and for a long second the Norwegian sea brightened without brightening. A blinding flash that was not light but the water itself, remembering the moment a dead machine lost its voice. Part 12, Aftermath on the surface. They came up wrong. Not in sequence, not by the book. Just three shadows shouldering through a square of night water like survivors breaking the surface of a dream. The bell thumped the Scotty's rail. Hands took lines. Voices said names without question marks. Halvorsen's faceplate hit air first. She said nothing until her regulator was out. When she did, it was a number, routine demanding its tithe. 3 aboard. Dahl didn't ask the missing name. He already knew which integer the day would refuse. The deck carried them with that purposeful kindness ships remember in bad weather. Helmets off. Straps. Blankets whether needed or not. In the red-lit lab, the dive computer scrolls wrote a plain story. Pressure transients. EM flutters like small storms. A double spike in the minute the field collapsed. The hydrophones played back silence so thorough it sounded like a decision. Array? Halvorsen asked. Nothing, Dahl said, astonished by the quality of the nothing. Carrier gone. Trench echo gone. Room tone. He didn't say God help us. He let the quiet handle that job. They ran the checklists because grief is allergic to clipboards. Vitals green enough. Lactate high. Suit seams. 1 scuffed, 1 abraded, 1 fine. Renaud set his camera on the bench and couldn't make himself unclip the card. Ortiz stared at his hands as if someone had replaced them with competent strangers. Dahl tapped a speaker and the deck filled with water again. The faint wash of their own wake as the Scotty pivoted for weather, the creak of a crane that had not yet decided to rest. No knocks. No ghost code written in hull. The ship sounded like a ship. Say it, Ortiz told the room, daring it to disagree. It's over, Halvorsen wrote instead. The first report was always by hand in her world, even if the hand had to borrow letters from several alphabets to make the sentence hold. Field terminated at source. Unknown ritual apparatus destroyed. 1 diver Kia voluntary stay behind to complete action. She stopped, pen tip resting in the comma between duty and language, and did not write sacrifice. The word had done its work already. She placed the notebook on the chart table and let the paper stipple her palm. Seal the grid, she said. We go dark and we go home. They gave the coordinates back to the sea. Buoys up, array wound, the ship's noise trimmed to humane. On the long run south, the Scotty altered itself into a vessel that had never known a trench. AIS broadcasts showed a meandering calibration cruise. The log read like a maintenance day with unusually cooperative weather. In the wardroom, Renaud opened the camera at last. He held the card like a thing that might hiss. They gathered not as audience but as witnesses to see what memory would refuse. The footage stitched itself. Black that drank light. A ring of brows around a red that was an argument. Myra's breath fogging nothing. At the moment the charge went, the recording bloomed a static that looked like snow on a childhood television. The next frame was glass settling and silt like confetti and a world that had learned a new rule. Audio? Dahl asked. Renault scrubbed a slider. The deck filled with the sound of room tone underwater, moving silence, the basic chord of depth. At 9 seconds something almost familiar threaded under the wash. Talk, talk, talk. Pause. Talk, talk. Not loud, not even clear, more a structure than a noise, the way shadows describe an object in a room you keep dim on purpose. Artifact, Ortiz said quickly, as if speed could change truth into compression. Maybe, Renault said. He did not boost the game. He did not lay on filters. He let the ambiguous live because that's what honest things do above a certain depth. They stared at nothing until nothing turned into exhaustion. For an hour, and then 2, they performed the low ceremonies of ending. Rinsing and hanging gear with more care than necessary. Writing down small facts in block capitals. Finding the right drawer for a spare O-ring because the body needs a job it can finish. Dahl left a mug on the bridge rail and found it 20 minutes later where he'd left it. An ordinary miracle that made his hands shake. By noon, the sky remembered itself. The Norwegian sea stepped out of its funeral clothes and put on a gray that could pass for generous. A gull rode the bow for 7 breaths and quit. On another day, someone would have said omen. Today, they called it weather. The radio woke to the administrative voice of a Navy liaison with a smile only the phone could see. Dr. Halvorsen, the voice said in the sweet tone bureaucrats use when they want you to know there will be no paperwork, because someone else already has it. Our thanks for the acoustic calibration. Your logs will show minimal interference. Your track will read routine. There was no distressed vessel. There is no derelict. There are no remains. Halvorsen stared at the bulkhead while the voice finished wrapping their absence in ribbon. Understood, she said, because understanding is a thing you say when comprehension is improper. That night's sleep taught each of them a different lesson. Ortiz woke to the radiator in his cabin tapping in the old house rhythm plumbing loves, and had to sit on the edge of the bunk until he could hear copper again instead of bone. Renault lay in the lab with a towel over his eyes like a patient refusing light. He dreamed of a chalk line at waist height and tally marks marching toward a number no one would reach. Dahl dreamed nothing and woke convinced he'd been promised something he couldn't recall. Halvorsen did not dream. She stood on the bridge and let the ship teach her how stars are counted when the last number never arrives. Days later, denial came dressed as routine. A courier delivered a 1-page letter stamped in the right places. No such mission is acknowledged. No Soviet derivative exists at the referenced coordinates. No collaboration is inferred. Attached, a maintenance invoice for hydrophone array test, route classification. Coastal. Someone had set the font a shade friendlier than military sans. Courtesy is its own kind of silence. Renault uploaded a fragment anyway, not reckless, not brave, obedient to a private grammar that says some things belong to the dark but not all of them. 17 seconds. No red. No faces. Just the ordinary silt of depth and, under it, the suggestion of a rhythm the human ear completes even when it shouldn't. He titled it with a catalog number meaningless to anyone who wasn't on the Scotty. Comments arrived like flotsam. Compression, peridolia, great foley, turn your gain down. My uncle heard this in the North Atlantic in '94. Stop, you'll make it worse. One anonymous account typed, she's still knocking. Another replied, or we are. Ortiz fixed a roof in Cadiz and, one afternoon, set his hammer down because the nail heads on the joist looked too much like a pattern. He laughed, swore at himself in 2 languages, and hit the nail anyway, hard and clean. The sound was human. It did him good. Halvorsen wrote the report she would never file, then taped it shut and slid it behind a dull manual no one ever reads until the lights go out. In its last paragraph, she did what captains do when no admiral is watching. She told the truth in a shape that would keep a young diver's name from being borrowed by a story. Action completed at depth. Transmission silenced. No further anomalies detected at sight. She did not write heroism. She did not write haunting. She wrote the weather because that is what survives. When the Scotty reached harbor, There was no reception, no interview, no quiet man with the right questions. A quartermaster signed for a coil of line with more ceremony than the sea offers most lives. The ship went on with the business of being a ship. Renault sent a single email to a list that didn't exist. A link, a timestamp, 3 numbers no one could parse without a map and a memory he would never share. He closed his laptop and put his ear to the radiator like a child listening for a train. What he heard was plumbing. What he thought he heard was a human hand deciding not to knock. If anyone above that trench goes still at midnight and listens for the hull to answer, they will hear the same thing sailors have always heard when machines go cold and the weather is patient. The body's own tide, the ship's slow talk, the long hush of pressure as the sea tries on the shape of silence. Some swear there's a rhythm under it. Some say the rhythm is us. And if you ever find yourself at sea